Welcome, everybody, to the regular season recap. Going over all the games in Week 18, some eventful, some not. But Saturday Night Football, we got to see a winner takes all for the division. Colts, Texans. You were wearing your CJ Proud jersey, and he made us CJ proud on Saturday Night Football in front of millions of fans as the Texans beat the Colts and won the division inevitably in historic fashion. CJ Stroud turning a Texans team that was 3-13 just a year ago. 3-13. In fact,
What?
the last 3 years in a row, they had Lovie Smith.
What?
They had David Culley.
What?
And then they bring in D'Amico Ryans, changing the culture and winning the division in the very first year as the partnership here. Texans and Colts game. Your thoughts on this game here?
Yeah, Texans and Colts game. It did not disappoint. I mean, D'Amico Dog coming out there, getting his guys ready to set the tone in this game early. The Colts were able to get Jonathan Taylor going early in this game. However, they just weren't able to get enough done on third down early enough to keep it close enough in the first half. And then you had Gardner Minshew miss a pass to Mo Alley-Cox, which could have broken the game in their direction. However, at the end of the first half, I was like, you know what? It's only a one-score game. Colts played pretty poorly. I think this is going to be a really good second half, and it did not disappoint. And then we saw the Colts seemingly seize the momentum back in the third quarter, and then you had Gardner Minshew starting to come back into his own, and then Shane Steichen at the end of the game was like, we're going to run it every single time with Jonathan Taylor, and then we're going to make sure that we go down with the ship there with him riding that bad ankle. He had to go back to the locker room, ends up coming back into the game. However, CJ Stroud just was too much to overcome for this team. I mean, him and Nico Collins, who doesn't get enough credit. I mean, what a 6'4" monster of a machine at wide receiver there, having over 130 yards receiving in this game, having that massive opening play with CJ Stroud, and just the play where he's dropping back, throws it 40 yards total air, falling fadeaway shot, just like Josh Allen was doing all night on Sunday. Then he gets it to Nico Collins, which was one of the best plays I've seen, not only in this game, but all season. And then CJ Stroud was able to pull it off. And for me, the difference between CJ Stroud, Patrick Mahomes, and a lot of quarterbacks in the league is how comfortable are you on third and long, second and long, that he's going to pick up the play. And even on a 3rd and 13, even on a 1st and 20, even when there's penalties getting set back, I was never like, oh, the drive is completely over. And this is without John Mechie. This is without Noah Brown on this team. This is without Tank Dell being there. This is with some of their players being banged up. This is with Dameon Pierce falling off a cliff this season. This is without not one of the greatest offensive lines in the league. However, they were able to overcome the Colts' initial push in the second half to make it a close game, and then inevitably Gardner Minshew's inaccuracy ended up costing the Colts in this game, and they were able to seize the momentum.
Yeah, and they had that pivotal drop on 4th down. Feel for the wide receiver there who dropped the pass, but my biggest takeaway from this game, we've heard a lot of buzz about CJ Stroud. He's kind of locked himself into that offensive rookie of the year. And I think he kind of immediately stepped in and became a top 10 quarterback. But after this game, this was a real big game for me because obviously this is like his first real playoff game at the end of it. Winner goes home, loser goes home. And the way he stepped out the first drive, threw that bomb to Nico Collins, and then just the rest of the game, 20 for 26. He had nearly 300 yards, no picks, 2 touchdowns. After this game, I can comfortably say, looking down all the teams, all 32 quarterbacks, he's a top 5 quarterback, 100%. You look at the quarterbacks that you could put above him respectfully. You put Patrick Mahomes, Lamar Jackson, Joe Burrow, Josh Allen, those 4 people. There's not really anybody else I could throw in there. Maybe you want to throw in Jalen Hurts after how he played on Sunday. He's not in that conversation. I would take CJ Stroud. So really, it's like, I feel like there's 5 quarterbacks in the league that could put themselves in a situation like that and be Superman. And CJ Stroud put himself in that conversation as a top 5 quarterback. And I feel very confident putting him there and keeping him there for the next 10 years.
Yeah, I feel more than confident keeping him and putting him there because I don't think it's that ridiculous to say, because you go into a dysfunctional Houston situation where we didn't know what D'Amico Ryans was going to be. The NFL is kind of moving away from defensive head coaches here. It's definitely frowned upon when you hire that type of head coach. And then also, you're stepping into a team last year where you thought Lovie Smith screwed you over by winning the last game versus the Indianapolis Colts last year to end your season, which you ended up getting the number 2 pick, and then you used that to go out there and get CJ Stroud. However, you really weren't sure what the weapons around him were going to do. And then, as far as a rookie head coach, rookie quarterback, we haven't seen too many rookie quarterbacks be this good in their first year where they're top in the league in QBR. They're leading a team who is 3-13 the past few years. You're leading a team out of the weird, uncomfortable, bizarre situation that was Deshaun Watson. They ended up passing him on to the Cleveland Browns over there. But this was a very dysfunctional team. There are a lot of question marks, not a lot of people like Houston's owner either. So the fact that he was able to come into this situation and do this much in year one, we have not seen Josh Allen be this good in year one. He was a turnover machine for the first 2 years of his career. Wasn't until year 3 where he really took off. We didn't see Patrick Mahomes even play in his first year, but when we did see him play, he had a Hall of Fame tight end and maybe the best wide receiver of our generation, not named Calvin Johnson, on
Yes.
his team. And then CJ Stroud comes in with a couple rookie wide receivers where Andy Reid had kind of already developed the weapons and offensive line and defense around Patrick Mahomes.
Mhm.
Andy Reid was also a head coach who had been to perennial conference championships,
And
had
Super
been
Bowls.
to Super Bowls before with the Philadelphia Eagles, had made it deep playoff runs with Alex Smith on that team. So Patrick Mahomes is walking into a much more stable situation than CJ Stroud is. The
Mhm.
fact that he was able to change franchise that much and change their fortunes. Like, you look at Trevor Lawrence, what is he doing to the Jacksonville Jaguars? Then you look at Jalen Hurts, what is he doing right now? You look at Dak Prescott. Well, he walked in, he had Des Bryant, Terrence Williams, Jason Witten, Ezekiel Elliott in his prime, the best offensive in the league, and still a great defense there. So CJ
Yeah.
Stroud, this is one of the most impressive feats, and the fact that he has a chance to host a home playoff game for the city of Houston after all of the weirdness with Deshaun Watson, all the weirdness with hiring one coach, firing them, hiring another one, Lovie Smith seemingly as a placeholder. Then you get D'Amico Ryans here, and then you get Bobby Slowick, who has had a cup of coffee with Sean McVay. He has had a cup of coffee with Kyle Shanahan as well, which is
Mhm.
a pretty good sign if you're an offensive guy.
Yeah, and I'm going to build on to what you said as well, going more like Lamar Jackson also. You look at all these quarterbacks that I mentioned that can be in that conversation with him.
Yeah.
Lamar Jackson, what have the Ravens been the last 25 years? Perennial playoff teams, great defenses. John Harbaugh, and then Joe
Yeah.
Burrow even. Joe Burrow, he stepped into a situation. He did change the fortunes of the Bengals, but they also drafted Jamar Chase and they had good weapons around him. Didn't have a good offensive line, but he turned their futures around. So really it's like you're talking about a guy who year one stepped in. The only other person that we can think about, although he didn't play year one, is none other than the GOAT himself, Tom Brady. He
Brady.
stepped in, won them a Super Bowl. And other than that, it's like, who else can you really think about? All of these other guys that we can put in the top five, which we confidently can now put him in, they were stepping into situations where they were either a good organization, had a good coach, or they weren't great to start, like Josh Allen in that example. So I think that with CJ Stroud, like he doesn't have much expectations going into this Browns game, but if he could go out there and win there without his number one wide receiver, he has Nico Collins back. That does help, but going in there, winning a playoff game for a Texans organization that had that Deshaun Watson thing floating over him, they had these weird hires, Lovey Smith, David Culley, and then Bob McNair, the issues that he's had as an owner. They had this weird aura with the Deshaun Watson situation. Did they um, enable him to do these things? We don't know, but now they go in there. We go into a division winning playoff game where they're going to be hosting a playoff game against these Cleveland Browns. It's something that we really have. It's kind of unprecedented to see it to this point.
Yeah. And you are the Texans whisperer though, and then we did the recaps, and if you go back and watch the videos when we were previewing the AFC South, go back and watch those because I was like, I want to put the Texans in the playoffs so badly, but I
Yeah.
just don't know enough yet. But we had them at 8 and 9, which is, I feel like we had them in like that 7 to like 9 win range.
Mhm.
And that was our range for the Houston Texans. And I feel like expectationally, we are the most accurate. We've been earliest on the Houston Texans. We are earliest on CJ Stroud. And then going into the draft, go back and watch those videos. I was saying I would rather have CJ Stroud over Bryce Young. If you go back and just watch the tape, look at what he does in big games. And then he was kind of punished just for, being an Ohio quarterback.
Mm.
And it's kind of a stigma, but CJ Stroud was also by the local Houston media voted person of the year in Houston, and that's no easy feat there. So not
No.
only is he one of the most talented players on the field, arguably a top not only 5 but arguably a top 3 quarterback at the end of this playoff run, but it's like no one else has been able to do this. And then he has the talent and he also has the personality on top of it here. And
Yeah.
his teammates love him. And I feel like you also look at his interviews with Tom Brady, asking him the right questions. And then he's also the guy who's texting you at midnight, like, oh, I just saw this play that the defense is running. I think
Mhm.
it'd be really cool if we did this to counter that. So you also have that workaholic. He's going to push your teammates. Like, if CJ's 22, 23 years old and he's
Mhm.
doing this, he's working this hard, then it makes everyone around him step their game up. And D'Amico Ryans, he's a young head coach, so he's there to grind. Bobby Slowick is coaching as an offensive coordinator for a job next year. And again, if you've had a cup of coffee with Sean McVay and Kyle Shanahan, you have a great chance at getting a head coaching job in the NFL today.
Yeah, and I'm excited to see how the Texans develop because we've been saying next year is really their year to really make that push. But at this point, depending on how the seeding breaks down, if they win this playoff game, they'll most likely match up with whether it be a Ravens in the next round or if there's an upset, potentially taking on a team like the Bills or Chiefs. We don't know exactly there, but I mean, this is an opportunity. If he can win a playoff game, I think that's already going to bring him solidified, not necessarily in the Brickyard circle because we already have him there, but the media is going to start to come around. Like, is this guy a top 5 quarterback? He stepped in, he threw 26 touchdowns, 4 interceptions. He didn't throw an interception for the first half of the season at
Yeah.
this point. So he doesn't turn the ball over, which some of these guys in this top 5 do.
Yeah.
And he stepped in and immediately was a top 5 quarterback.
Do you like come on? Realistically, is Lamar Jackson or Josh Allen doing this as a rookie in this situation? Absolutely not. Lamar Jackson couldn't figure out a base zone that the Chargers played against him in the playoffs, and he
Yeah.
lost to freaking ancient Philip Rivers.
Yeah. So, like,
He lost to the Chargers. Like,
yeah, and that's the thing with Lamar Jackson. That's what stained his legacy so far is he hasn't had that playoff success. Josh Allen has had the turnovers has been his problem. He's had playoff performances that are legendary, but hasn't quite made it over the hump against Patrick Mahomes. Patrick Mahomes, obviously, he's the anointed number one, but all these other guys that are in the top 5 have had their fair things with concern. Joe Burrow, I guess, is injuries to that point, but
yeah.
everybody else, there's questions there. CJ Stroud hasn't given us any questions yet.
Yeah, he'll give us and then we'll be able to see that fully match right next year. I don't think he has enough talent to get it done against Cleveland, but how confident does this victory make you going into the playoffs for the Houston Texans?
It makes me extreme. Coming from a Texas whisperer, I'm like, I know he doesn't have the weapons and he shouldn't beat the Browns, but top 5 quarterback in the league, elevating his talent, I don't think it's impossible, especially because of how the Texans defense has performed. Will
Yeah.
Anderson been stepping in immediately, been that top edge rusher in the league. Their secondary has stepped up. Derek Stingley, who when he was with David Culley didn't look like he was going to be that top corner who was drafted above Sauce Gardner. He stepped up. He hasn't been Sauce Gardner, but he's been a really solid corner for him.
Yeah.
And then they have some really nice safeties there as well. So honestly, like the Texans, they shouldn't beat the Browns, but would I be surprised if they did? No.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if they did. However, we can't hype up Joe Flacco all of these previous weeks and then suddenly think that the Texans, who are undermanned right now, can go ahead and then beat the Browns. The only question mark and the only way they could is the health of Amari Cooper, who dropped, I believe that was the game he had 265 receiving yards, was against the Browns. And then Elijah Moore. If both of them are hurt, then yes, maybe you have a point there. But they were able to get Jonathan Taylor going versus the Houston Texans. They were able to run the ball against them, going up against the Kevin Stefanski team. That's not something I'm in love with. I think they'll be able to get Jerome Ford and Kareem Hunt going. And then with Javen Njoku and Joe Flacco there, and then you're also wearing the Miles Garrett jersey, it's like, I feel like that's definitely a tall task. However, the advantage is the Browns just blew you out. So how much tape can you really go back and then look at to for things you can improve, because they beat the Texans about as badly as you could, albeit without CJ Stroud. And then the Texans have the benefit of the doubt. They're like, okay, the Browns have to make it this playoff run because, salary cap issues. Just go ahead and start a Manum franchise. You'll realize how screwed the Browns
They
are
are.
over the next few years
Turn off
with
salary
their
cap.
salary cap. So this is really the Browns win or go home. And then the Texans are like, all right, well, it's win or go home. All the pressure's on the Browns. They have the better roster. They're the early favorites. No one expects anything from us. So let's go out there, let it rip.
As long as they play competitively, I'd say they win in that case because they shouldn't be where they are right now based on where their development was. They don't have their first round pick this year, but it hasn't really hurt them at all at this point. And then, if they can play a competitive game, even if they don't win against the Browns, I think it's going to say a lot
Yeah.
about what their next 2 or 3 years are going to look like.
Yeah, I think it says a lot for how their next 2 to 5 years will look like for the Houston Texans.
Mhm.
For the Indianapolis Colts, Anthony Richardson got hurt versus the Houston Texans. They were able to knock him out of that game. However, how much does this game encourage you for the Indianapolis Colts future going forward from here, seeing how bad the Jacksonville Jaguars looked, not knowing necessarily the future of Derrick Henry or Mike Vrabel in that division, which if both those guys are overhauled, that would be advantage Texans, advantage Colts. How interested are you to see the development of Anthony Richardson with all of the weapons surrounding him?
I'm very excited. I mean, Josh Downs, he's one of those guys that I feel like if you haven't watched enough football, you might forget about how great he played this year. I don't think he had a single drop all year, or if he did, he had like Larry Fitzgerald numbers. I think that there's a chance that if Anthony Richardson's playing in that game, they potentially pull that game out. Gardner Minshew was a great story, and I think that he should deserves another opportunity somewhere else again. We said before the season that Gardner Minshew should be able to step in and be a franchise guy, and he proved that. He wasn't perfect. He had some games that were ugly, but at the end of the day, he goes out there and lets it rip. So I think that for them, they should feel super confident. They had a 9-8 season when they had their star quarterback go down. Like they should absolutely feel good, especially because they were this close to potentially winning that game.
Yeah, they were this close to winning this game. And honestly, with this game, I thought we were robbed of overtime because I thought if you're going to run the ball every single time with Jonathan Taylor, then run the ball every single time with Jonathan Taylor and pick it up. Or you put Zach Moss in that passing situation. And I get that Gardner Minshew's pass was a little bit behind him, but for a guy that's only caught 6 passes all year, that's not a spot you really want to put him in. Or maybe you do a little bit of motion action and you end up trying to get the ball to Josh Downs. But I feel like the play call on that one,
And Steichen.
Shan Steichen was trying to get a little bit too cute in that situation. And then the Texans end up missing the extra point. So I'm like, okay, if they make the extra point and then the Colts go down there and get a touchdown, we are honestly robbed of overtime. Or even if just Gardner Minshew, he had Mo Ali Cox wide open in the first half and that would have been a touchdown. If he hits them that play, the Colts probably end up going away with that victory. But every single time the Colts could have pushed the momentum, the Texans grabbed it right back. They had no business scoring on that drive that they did. It kept going 1st and 20. They kept getting penalties, and CJ Stroud kept pulling magic out of his you know what, and then getting them down the field, making plays, getting the ball to Nico Collins. And you'd think the Colts would be like, okay, it's one guy burning us. You'd think you'd stop him, but they couldn't figure it out. And if you can't stop one guy, you don't deserve to make the playoffs.
Yeah, at the end of the day. Yeah, Nico Collins had almost 200 yards in this game. 10,
Yeah.
10 catches for 190 he went for. So Nico Collins is a dog. So I'm excited to see how he plays against the Browns. We had another Saturday game, less eventful, less exciting to talk about.
Yeah.
Steelers get the win against Tyler Huntley and all the Ravens backups. 17-10. They are now 10-7. They are now in the dance. They'll be taking on the Bills in the first round. Any confidence that you have, or any renewed confidence that you have in the Steelers team with the win against the backups of the Ravens?
It's a good vibe, definitely. I feel like my problem with the Steelers is I feel like they're a talented roster. I feel like they have good pieces on offense, and I feel like they have a good defensive unit, but it's so bizarre how bad they are without TJ Watt. And unfortunately, as soon as I saw TJ Watt get hurt in that game, I'm like, with how everything has gone this NFL season, that just secured the Steelers playoff spot for me because I was like, we've seen everything go exactly the opposite way as you think it's going to go. And then I just see TJ Watt get injured by his own teammate. It was a freak accident, and then he ends up getting at best, they said it's a grade 2 sprain on his knee. So he's probably not going to go. And if he does, he's not going to be too effective. He's just going to be a decoy out there. But for me, the Steelers do have some opportunities to run the ball because the Dolphins did have some success. I think their defense is a little bit better than the Dolphins. And then also, you look at George Pickens, you look at Deontay Johnson, and you look at Pat Freiermuth. The Bills play a lot of zone defense, and that's how Joe Burrow was able to pick them apart. And Pat Freiermuth is one of the smartest tight ends against zone defense. So I think the Steelers do have a chance against the Buffalo Bills. And I think if it's going to be a 10-point spread, I would take the Steelers to cover. I just think they're such a different team without TJ Watt that I would need to see it to believe it. But I don't think like the Steelers are completely out of it because their offensive line has gelled. And then Najee Harris, if they can get the run game going with him, and then Mason Rudolph, he's come out of nowhere. Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, shine your nose so bright and take the Steelers into the Buffalo fog because we'll need it. And he loves George Pickens and he loves Deontay Johnson. And one of the Bills' best corners went down on Sunday Night Football. And I felt like with how bad the Miami's Dolphins defense is, they had two of their top linebackers injured, and then Van Ginkel went out. So basically, they're missing their entire starting linebacker unit, and then their two top pass rushers are out in that game, and then another corner went down for them. They're down, I believe it's Rohu or Xavier Howard is out. So with that, I'm like, they do have a chance against the Buffalo Bills because they're also a little bit banged up too. And it's going to be Josh Allen. How many opportunities is he going to give the Steelers at the end of the day?
Yeah, that's the thing. I would take them to cover because I don't know how many points the Bills will score at that point in time. Because it's like I trust the Steelers' ability to shut down James Cook. Although James Cook played great, 1,500 scrimmage yards this year. Credit to him. Stephon Diggs has been inconsistent. Gabe Davis went down with injury. So it's like you have Shakir there. You have Dalton Kincaid, which I feel like they can easily game plan for at that point. So I definitely think this is going to be closer to what we saw on Saturday against the Ravens.
Yeah.
Although, obviously, I think that it's going to be harder to game plan for Josh Allen than Tyler Huntley, obviously. But
Are you sure?
yeah, but I think that it's going to be a lot closer than people think, especially because you still have Mike Tomlin there. I would take
Yeah.
Mike Tomlin over Sean McDermott, even if Sean McDermott has these, whatever heinous terrorist speech they have planned for it. Maybe it's Black Wall Street. Maybe it's the, Nagasaki bombing. I'm not quite sure, but I'm sure he'll get his boys going with
Yeah.
some sort of terrorist speech.
Maybe it's the Osage people of Oklahoma. If you watch Killers of the Flower Moon this year, maybe he wants to show the Pittsburgh Steelers what it's like to go out there and build a railroad. But Sean McDermott, you can always rely on him to come up with some offensive, cancelable, heinous speech. And if we're talking about Aaron Rodgers being dangerous, which a lot of media pundits are, then we have to talk about Sean McDermott's rhetoric being dangerous. Like, yeah, guys, what we need to do is go out there and burn down Tyreek Hill's house in Miami. And then he's like, no, I didn't mean actually go there and burn down Tyreek Hill's house in Miami.
Oh my God. Yeah, that was heinous. And then for the Dolphins, right? Because I know we haven't talked about the Bills and Dolphins game, but we're here already. So that Dolphins and Bills game, as we talk about it briefly, like the Dolphins, they went out, they had one first down in the second half against the Bills. The Bills, they had 4 turnovers from Josh Allen, 2 picks, and then 2 fumbles, one which was recovered. But the Dolphins, 14 points mustered up. Do you lose confidence in the Dolphins after that game?
Of course. I never had any confidence in the Dolphins outside of Tyreek Hill, but if it's no Jalen Waddle, it's pretty pathetic. And for a team that's like, oh yeah, watch the Dolphins go out here and rack up yards on yards on yards, I'm like, please tell me against who? Against the Denver Broncos, who apparently Sean Payton came out was trying to sabotage Russell Wilson this year. Against you couldn't even do it against the Tennessee Titans because he blew the first 2 touchdown lead with 3 minutes left to go in a game, and you let Will Levis do that in your house. Oh yeah, when was that? On prime time. And then for me, it's a little bit of Andy Reid issues with earlier in his career, and also Kyle Shanahan issues with Mike McDaniel because Devon Achane was running all over the Bills. He averages the most yards per carry in the
Mm-hmm.
NFL this year.
Yep.
He's the fastest running back. How many run plays did we see like we saw in the first half? In the
Mm-hmm.
second half, it seemed like they completely abandoned the run game when
Mm-hmm.
they weren't trailing the Buffalo Bills. And at the end of the day, it came down to a punt return when the entire Miami Dolphins defense had gotten hurt. We had Jalen Ramsey out there, but Stephon Diggs was burning Jalen Ramsey. And if Josh Allen hit him on that pass, he would have had a wide open touchdown there. So it's like for the Dolphins, it's like they played about as good as you could play. But at the end of the day, I'm never in love with Tua, and then he threw 2 interceptions in that game, and as soon as the Dolphins got the ball, you're like, "All right, let's see what they can do." I'm like, "Yeah, they'll probably throw a pick on this drive." And as soon as Tyreek Hill goes to the sideline, what does Tua do? He
The
throws
very
a
next
pick.
pass.
Yeah, and then Tyreek Hill, 13 targets. Next highest receiver with the target, 3 targets. So it's like when you're this dependent on one player who can't get himself the ball, and then the run game is working and you abandon that, it's like, "Oh yeah, Mike McDaniels, what a big brain. The run game's working. Let me completely get rid of that." And Mike McDaniels at this point, it's like, I like him. He's a good head coach, but that interview where he's like, oh, wait, you don't have any other questions for me? It's like, it seems like he likes hearing himself talk a little bit too much. And at this point, he seems like he's a little bit overrated as a head coach, at least offensively, because anytime they face a team with a winning record, they drop 20 points. And the
Mm-hmm.
only team that they beat was Dallas. And Dallas is, you know how they are on the road against good teams. Not very good. Same with the Dolphins. And they're kind of the mirror image of each other, but in opposite conferences. And then for the Bills, it's like Josh Allen had 3 turnovers and you still won that game, but it was on a punt return. So how confident do you really feel going into the playoffs?
Yeah, with the Dolphins, this is my analogy that I've come to feel with Tua. The Dolphins, what are they? What does every media pundit talk about with them? They talk about speed. Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, Devon A. Train. They're surrounded by a bunch of Lamborghinis, but the person who's manning it all is driving a Corolla, and that's Tua Tagovailoa. He's a good dependent car, but with you're surrounded by all this speed, but you can't move. With Tua, it's not that I think he's a bad quarterback, but in the situation that the Dolphins are in, the kind of offense that Mike McDaniels wants to run, it makes way more sense for me for them to go ahead and maybe they try to do a swap with Justin Fields where they trade Tua to the Bears because the Bears I feel like would fit better with Tua than the Dolphins because they're not necessarily trying to run the ball down your throat, or if they are, they're trying to be a big physical running team. And plus, I think that with a Cole Kmet and DJ Moore, he'd still be an adequate quarterback.
In Chicago?
Yeah, I think so.
Outside? I don't know.
I think he would be fine. And then Justin Fields and that offense, I think would work a lot better. He can still push the ball down the field to people like Tyreek Hill. He's fast. They want to run RPOs, but they really can't with Tua. So I feel like in a situation where you can package a Tua for Justin Fields, or maybe if it's possible to do a 3-team trade, they could do something like that because the Bears, the Bears don't really make sense for Justin Fields for what he wants and what the offense has there. And for the Dolphins, like Tua doesn't really fit what they have. And plus, I just don't think Tua's that guy for them at this point.
Yeah, I don't think he's that guy, and he's not really the guy to go up against Josh Allen. It's kind of a mismatch there. And then you can say, well, he doesn't have Jalen Waddle. However, it's like we saw this earlier in the season when they went to Buffalo and they got wiped out in Buffalo. And then Josh Allen played about as poorly as he could play. And then it came down to a special teams play. And
Mhm.
you weren't able to capitalize on any of his turnovers. You had Wilkins who got the fumble, which was an incredible play where he stripped Josh
Yeah.
Allen, knocked it out, and then grabbed the ball, falling to the ground there, and just made a great play. But it's like it seems like Josh Allen is just too good to go up against the Miami Dolphins, and then for you to roll out Tua there, and then he just throws an interception or forces the ball into double coverage, and then he had some pretty bad throws, and it seems like anytime he gets flustered, he starts making mistakes there. And sure, is he good at throwing with anticipation? Yes. Is he accurate? Yeah. But at the same time, is he a playoff quarterback? I'm not convinced yet. And I feel like this game was like, all right, if there's any game you need to win, it's going to be this one. No Gabe Davis in the second half. Chief secondary was getting banged up as well. Both teams are injured here, but to not get a first down when you have Tyreek Hill, I feel like that's pretty ridiculous.
Yeah, it's super ridiculous. And like I give credit to the Bills for stopping them in the second half, but at the same time, it's like Josh Allen, my issues with Josh Allen. he's one of those guys that I do want to love. I want to love Josh Allen because at his best, he's fantastic and he can be Superman. But sometimes he tries to be Superman so much that he ends up being his own kryptonite. And some of those interceptions that he threw were just heinous. I mean, the one that was to Gabe Davis in the end zone, throwing back shoulder, and it was just a horrible ball. And then his other interception earlier in the game was just as bad
To Gabe Davis.
to Gabe Davis. Surprise, surprise. But it's just like when it comes to the Bills, it's Josh Allen. Like he'll have these plays where he's just amazing, but at the same time, he tries to make these plays so often. I think because of that Patrick Mahomes comparison he constantly has, he's constantly trying to make those Patrick Mahomes plays when he's better off just playing the normal game, playing at his own speed, and not trying to be Superman. Because when he
Yeah.
tries to be Superman, that's when these mistakes occur.
Yeah, because there are definitely drives, and it's fun to rip on Josh Allen just because he's on the Bills. But at the end of the day, he is one of the most talented quarterbacks to ever play the game, realistically. And you see these moments where he'll get surgical, he'll hit the short pass, and then he'll hit Dalton Kincaid, who's come on. They're starting to build that chemistry there. But then there'll just be plays where it's just like, what are you thinking? And it's one thing if it's just interceptions, but some of the fumbles that he has are pretty ridiculous.
Yep.
I mean, and it's usually just him trying to force the issue where it's like Josh Allen doesn't need to run the ball at all. He could just sit
Yeah.
in the pocket, pick apart a team, but it's still learning those moments to throw the ball away. The second interception, I don't mind too much because if you're going to go for it on fourth down, you might as well just punt it. And for me, it was kind of like the prototypical Andrew Luck punt when he would just chuck it down the field. So that one I don't have too much of a problem with, but the first one, you still had a chance to come away with points. You're all the way down there, and it was kind of funny because Eli Apple gets the interception and then he runs out to the 5 yard line. I was just like, what are you doing? Like,
The
you just
awareness.
take the would you just take the knee? Like, this is why, like, Eli Apple, it's like he's always doing so good. And it's like just like Josh Allen sometimes, and then he just makes some dumb mistake, says something to motivate the other team to get their ass, and then you're just like, oh, why did you do that?
It's just he opens his mouth. It's like he would not be as hated if he just shut up every once in a while. Because he's like the Patrick Beverly of the NFL. He's not. It's not that he's like Patrick Beverly, fine role player, good player on a potentially championship team,
Yeah.
fills in whatever. The problem is that he thinks that he's better than he is. This goes for Pat Beverly as well, where he talks all this shit, but he's not that guy to back him up. It's
Yeah.
like you're gonna talk all this shit, and you're gonna have your better players have to back you up when you shouldn't have even said anything, especially with that Bengals and Chiefs game a couple years ago when he's
Yeah.
poking the wrong bear. Don't poke Patrick Mahomes.
Well,
Don't poke Travis
Dylan
Kelsey.
Brooks.
Yeah, exactly. Dylan Brooks figure. It's like Eli Apple, he's a fine corner, but is he Jalen Ramsey? Absolutely not. Is he Jair Alexander? Is he any of these other corners? Absolutely not. But he acts like he is.
Yeah, he's a fine second or third corner in your system, and he's a fine cover guy on someone like Gabe Davis, who
Exactly.
ended up going out in this game. We'll see how healthy he is, but if Gabe Davis isn't healthy and the Bills, one of their top corners, ended up getting banged up and had to leave the game at one point there, then
Mm.
we saw that the Dolphins were trying to target any other corner, trying to get Tyreek Hill off of him in this game. Does that give you any hope where in this game it felt like the Bills were trying very hard? It felt like the Dolphins, like you had Melvin Ingram covering Dalton Kincaid in this game, who Melvin Ingram is 34. He has no business out there covering
Yeah.
Dalton Kincaid at this point. Does that give you any cause to pause? Like, maybe this win isn't as impressive as everyone is saying it is, especially because it came down to a punt return. It's not like Josh Allen was like a Superman in this game. It's like at the end of the day, the offense scored 14 points and you had more turnovers than drives with touchdowns.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I give them credit for how they played in the second half, but like the turnovers, which is the biggest issue with the Bills and Josh Allen,
Yeah.
that's still an area of concern. They didn't eradicate my concern there. Like their defense can play against teams like the Dolphins, and I'm sure that they can contain that Steelers offense when they play them next week. But at the end of the day, the problem with the Bills is less about the talent in their defense and all their talented players there. The problem is that they give more opportunities to the other team. And they did not prove that they could eradicate that problem next week against a team like the Steelers, who can get turnovers.
Yeah.
In fact, they were top 10 in turnovers this year. So it's like, I still think that they can beat the Steelers, and I think they will. But at the same time, it's like, if we're talking about teams in the AFC, it's like, I still trust the Ravens more. I still trust the Browns more. I still trust the Texans even more.
Yeah.
And I still trust the Chiefs more. The Bills, like, they'll get a nice playoff win. People are going to hype them up, but are they going to make the Super Bowl? No, of
Yeah.
course not. They're going to face off against a team like the Ravens, and they're going to capitalize on those mistakes.
Yeah, and like for me, I didn't see enough to think that, oh yeah, they're definitely gonna go there and wipe out the Steelers. I just haven't seen that. We do have two coaches that struggle with adjustments that are going up against each other, but I think Najee Harris is playing the best football and he usually saves it. And Buffalo weather is kind of suited, and the Steelers have played the Bills tougher in this era, and the Steelers have beat them before, so I don't think the Steelers are going to look at the Bills and be like, "Oh, we're terrified."
Yeah. We'll see how we'll preview that when we talk about the super wild card weekend, but
Yeah.
I don't think it'll be a blowout by any means.
Yeah, and then we did have
This whole controversy around this Saints thing is ridiculous. Stop being a baby. Stop being a giant pussy at the end of the day, because
Yeah.
that's exactly what you're being. And Dennis Allen, have a pair of balls. Just say, yeah, we wanted to show them who's boss because we're your fucking NFC South rival.
yeah.
But instead, they were just giant bitches about it.
Arthur Smith was like, "Oh, you went for a touchdown at the end of the game. I don't fucking get that. That's not sportsmanship." And we were just like, "Is this the NFL or is this baseball?" Because Jamal Williams went to the Saints, and albeit it's not necessarily his fault, he hasn't had a touchdown all year. Maybe it is, but
It was hard too.
yeah, he's been hurt all year. But his teammates wanted to get him a touchdown. And then Arthur Smith whines about it. And then after the game in the press conference, Dennis Allen is like, "Actually, I told them to take a knee, and the team overruled them." And I'm like, dude, shut your mouth. Why are you saying and putting it out there that your team overruled you on taking a knee? And then Jameis says it's a team decision. So, first of all, what was your reaction to Arthur Smith? And then, second of all, what was your reaction to Dennis Allen saying his team overruled him on that play call? Like, talk about lack of self-awareness on both of them.
I said this to you when this play happened because I am a baseball fan, and I know that you don't follow it nearly as much, but it reminds me of Tony La Russa. For those who watch baseball, Tony La Russa, when he was on the White Sox, when they had one of his players hit a home run when they were up so big, and he threw a hissy fit about it.
Yeah.
Because it was an unwritten baseball rule. One of the reasons why nobody watches baseball, or why a lot of people are turned off by baseball, is because of all these stupid unwritten rules. And this is one of those unwritten football rules that nobody in the modern era gives a fuck about. And what's cooler, for Jamal Williams to get on the touchdown, it's the guy who led the league in touchdowns last year, get his first touchdown after he battled injuries and after he really didn't get enough opportunities this year with the Saints, getting him a touchdown on the goal line against a team who brought them to the goal line because they couldn't stop him, or doing this stupid kneel down. Like, at the end of the day, who the fuck cares? At the end of the day, you either lost 41-17 or 48-17. As far as I'm concerned, you deserve to lose 48-17 because the Saints walked all over you, and it's not like the Saints offense was explosive all year. The Saints offense was extremely painful to watch, which is why we hated the Saints all year.
Yeah.
It wasn't because we had any hate boner for Derek Carr. We love Derek Carr historically, and then Chris Olave and all these other dogs. Like, this isn't really any drama. It's just a Bedford mom versus a Bedford mom, or
A Bedford Cup.
it's just like, does it really matter? And at the end of the day, this is the final swan song for Arthur Smith, who was 7-10, 7-10, and 7-10. Didn't do anything in his time with the Falcons except for frustrate fantasy owners at the end of the day.
Yeah, with Arthur Smith, it's like also, your team drafted, you're supposed to be this offensive guru, right? That's where he got his calling cards. Like, okay, you're the guy who fixed Ryan Tannehill in Miami. And then you draft not one, not two, but three skill players in the top 10. And you're like, okay, offensive guru, you should know what to do with them, right? Kyle Pitts supposed to be the next Calvin Johnson, but at tight end. Okay, sounds like a pretty good prospect. Drake London supposed to be one of the best wide receivers of the draft last year. Bijan Robinson supposed to be one of the best rookie running backs coming into the league. And then Arthur Smith is like, I don't know what to do with Kyle Pitts. I don't know what to do with Drake London, and I don't know what to do with Bijan Robinson. And you're like, what the hell? You're supposed to be this offensive genius, and you don't know what to do with Kyle Pitts. You don't know what to do with Drake London, and you don't know what to do with Bijan Robinson, and he went some games without any carries this season when clearly he looked dominant. You're like, nah, bro, I got it. we're going to rush it with Tyler Algier. No disrespect to him, but Bijan Robinson is better. No disrespect to Cordero Patterson because he is the ageless wonder, but Bijan Robinson, clearly a better option. And you don't know what to do with 3 skill players you took in the top 10. I'm sorry, but if you don't know what to do with skill players that you take in the top 10 in the draft, maybe don't draft them, or maybe you should be a defensive head coach if you don't know how to coach an offense.
Yeah, I agree, and I don't think that they're gonna. I think whoever they end up hiring at head coach will be an upgrade because it's not like he showed in any of his 3 years with the Falcons that he was this exquisite head coach who was pouring out
Yeah.
offensive knowledge at the end of the day. If anything, a lot of people were scratching their heads like, wait a minute, you had a chance to have Lamar Jackson and you went with Desmond Ritter. It's like, are we really optimistic that he was the guy?
Yeah, and at the end of the day, what the fuck is the difference between 41-17 and 48-17? Oh, wait, yeah, the difference is you thought it was a good idea to have Desmond Ritter as your quarterback this season, and
Hmm.
you have to pay for that with every single point. And I get so sick and tired of the losers who are on the end of this who get paid millions of dollars to coach a game, to play a game. And I get it's a tough, grueling sport, and you have to commit so many hours, so many tears, so much blood to it. But at the end of the day, you get paid millions of dollars to coach and play a sport. It's the greatest job in the world. It's the greatest privilege you get to coach an NFL franchise. The fact that you're bitching about a team scoring on you, it's like, okay, what's the solution? Oh, yeah, stopping them. And if you can't do that, oh, well, the other team's going to score on you because it's a
Yeah,
professional sport. And what's more entertaining, a touchdown or someone taking a knee? I think a touchdown is a lot more entertaining than that. And if
yeah,
I was Dennis Allen, instead of being like, "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't know what happened." No, go full Walt Jr. on him. Go like, "No, man, you're just a pussy, Dad." Like that's what you need to do to him. You can't
yeah.
just go like, "Oh, I'm sorry, man," and then just walk sideways with your hands on your hips and your latte from Starbucks with your skim milk and Lexus. Like, no, show him who's boss. Actually, be an alpha. Don't bow down to a guy who's about to get fired and then wanted to exit the Falcons looking like a giant pussy. Like, what a stain on your legacy. Like, I'm not giving that guy a head coaching job. It's like, okay, clearly this guy doesn't have any dog or alpha in him if he's gonna whine and then get fired after that. It's like, hell yeah, you're gonna get fired.
He got what he deserved. It's just like fucking at the end of the Joker movie where he's like, "You get what you fucking deserve."
Yeah.
That's exactly what you deserve. You know what you could have done? You could have stopped them. All other 41 points, they walked all over you. You signed Jesse Bates in the offseason. You couldn't stop them. You have fucking Grady Jarrett there. Grady Jarrett's a monster. What was he doing in this game?
Yeah.
It's like at the end of the day, your defense let you down and your offense was anemic because you can't utilize your players.
Oh,
So all of this is your fault. You're the reason why you're 7-10.
you also paid more total dollars for Taylor Heineke than who else was out there. Oh yeah, Baker Mayfield this year. You also could have gone
Mhm.
out there and got who? Oh yeah, Carson Wentz was also out there. Oh, who else was out there? Oh yeah, Joe Flacco was also out there. When you were given the opportunity to ask about Lamar Jackson, you're like, we're good. We got Desmond Ritter. And for me, like anyone who thought that was a good idea deserved to lose their job this season. If it was Arthur Smith, good, you're gone.
Good riddance, because now you are gone. Maybe you're an offensive coordinator again. But if I'm a coaching staff who comes onto the floor, I would not be taking Arthur Smith as my offensive coordinator because he showed he couldn't utilize Drake London properly, he couldn't utilize Bijan Robinson properly, and he couldn't utilize Kyle Pitts. Now is Kyle Pitts a bust right now? We don't know. But I guess we'll find out next year when somebody can actually utilize him.
Yeah, and who did he have in Tennessee? Oh yeah, Derrick Henry. It's pretty hard to mess that up when you
And
have
AJ Brown.
and AJ Brown, yeah, one of the best wide receivers after the catch in the league at this point. And then the Saints, congratulations, you got the win. Maybe you'll be better this next year. I know Derek Carr struggled with some injuries, a lot of issues there, but do you think they stick with Dennis Allen into next year, or do you think they move on from him?
I think the reports are pointing to keeping him,
Okay.
but I just feel like that's too safe of a pick. Like, I don't think Dennis Allen is out coaching anybody, and he hasn't really impressed me. If I was the Saints, I would say, let's move on from him. Let's go after, I don't know, the greatest defensive coach of all time in Bill Belichick, if he's
Yeah.
available. I think that you can find a better coach, whether it be in college, whether it be in the NFL currently, or somebody who's won 6 Super Bowls.
Yeah, for me, what is your specialty? Defense, and Dennis Allen's specialty is defense. So at the end of the day, the Saints defense has been good at times this year and has looked elite at times this year. They did have some injuries, but it's mostly offense that's been the issue in figuring out that side of the ball. So maybe you give them another chance with a new offensive coordinator. Maybe you expect Derek Carr to stay healthy, but Derek Carr was definitely an issue, definitely holding them back this year. It's also his first year in the system where he kept getting injured. Usually it takes a couple weeks to really get in that rhythm. Even Lamar Jackson this year with the new offensive coordinator took him till about week 11 to week 13 to really take off and then get going here. But we'll see what happens with the Saints. But I think with Dennis Allen, is he going to take you to the Super Bowl and win it at this point? I don't think so.
I don't think anybody thinks that. But we might as well stay in the NFC South as we are already in the NFC South. So let's talk about the Panthers and Bucks game. Was it pretty? No.
No.
But was it a win for the Bucks? Did they win the division? They sure did. They won 9-0 and they finished this season with a winning record at 9-8. Baker Mayfield potentially comeback player of the year. And the Panthers are the first team since the 2008 Cleveland Browns to be shut out in back-to-back games. What a way to end the season.
Yeah, a lot of Browns lore. Go into some of that because we were talking a lot yesterday during the games about how the Panthers are the new Browns of the NFL right now. You mentioned they're the first team since the Cleveland Browns to get shut out in back to back games, but just how bad have the Panthers been and how bleak is their future after this season?
Well, at this point, before this season, they were 5-12, 5-12, 5-12 with Matt Rule. And then now, obviously, they were 2-15. They traded their first round pick this year, which ends up being the first overall pick. And now, what we're experiencing with David Tepper now, his first year as owner, cleans house after every, this is his first year. He clears house. He fired the GM. He fired, obviously, all the coaching staff as well. So he's going to clean house and start all over again. And if we follow down the path of what the Cleveland Browns were in 2000s, that was kind of what they were. Granted, they had some terrible talent. They were terrible at drafting, and they had some terrible head coaches in there. But that's kind of what we saw. We saw head coach after head coach every year, not really getting a chance to build something there. They did whiff on Frank Reich. We agree with that there. They fired the GM. Was that the right decision? We don't know. But David Tepper seems like he's one of these owners who's a little bit too overbearing and a little bit too hands-on for a guy who doesn't really seem like he knows what he's doing. Maybe all the cocaine that he does at the hedge fund, maybe that's what's doing it for him.
Yeah,
Allegedly, we don't know for sure, but who knows?
he's there with the bear, cocaine Tepper.
He's with the cocaine bear. He probably watches a lot of Scarface. But like what we can talk about the Cleveland Browns over the last 20 years before they had Kevin Stefanski and Baker Mayfield, it was terrible quarterback play, terrible offensive line, terrible roster, terrible coaching staff, and terrible ownership. And right now,
Yeah.
they check all of those boxes. Outside of Brian Burns, who's probably going to walk, there's not really anybody else on the offensive side or the defensive side that you can point to and go,
Yeah,
wow,
maybe
that
Frankie
guy's a stud.
Luvu. Yeah.
Yeah, and he's going to walk too.
Yeah.
So all of their talent on defense isn't going to want to come back. And then who's going to want to be the head coach at this point when you have all this drama around you? You're throwing beers at Jaguars fans, like as if they aren't down bad enough right now.
Yeah.
It's like
Arthur Smith.
Arthur Smith. They're trying to go after Ben Johnson.
Hell
Ben
no.
Johnson doesn't want to go there. He's
No.
literally having people tell him don't go there because of how toxic the organization is. So we are looking at the new Cleveland Browns, and we're going to see poor Bryce Young suffer through it, unfortunately.
Is it time for the return of the man, the myth, the legend, the Hugh, the action Jackson, Hugh Jackson, to return to coaching in the NFL? He got a rough shake with the Cleveland Browns. He said, "We're 1-15 this season. How can it possibly get worse from here? And not only did he deliver on that promise, that lie, whatever you want to call it, the next year they went 0-16 and followed it up with the worst year. Don't you think it's his time he gets another shot, especially with another team equally, if not more dysfunctional than the Cleveland Browns and the Carolina Panthers?
Well, as a head coach, he's 3-36. So I don't think there's a chance that he does, but you might as well fulfill the arc, right? I mean, Cleveland Browns, dysfunctional. I mean, if they can't get a head coach in the NFL, maybe they can look to congressmen like the Browns did. Maybe Condoleezza Rice is available. Maybe, if things don't work out for Chris Christie, maybe we can point to Chris Christie.
Nikki
Or
Haley could be the
I was
first.
about to say, if they want to nuke the entire GM and head coaching position, Nikki Haley's right for the job. That's all she wants to do. She just wants to bomb everything. So I think
Yeah,
that would be perfect.
yeah. If you're ready to go to war, Nikki Haley for Panthers head coach.
Yeah, there's something there. Maybe she doesn't win the presidency. Maybe she wants to get into the NFL world. And I think they would welcome her there.
Yeah, I think they would welcome her there. However, let's get back on a positive note here. Baker Mayfield being interviewed after this game, they were like, "How do you feel? How was the vibe in the locker room before the season?" He was like, "We knew the team we had. They made it. They won the division last year. They won the division the year before, and we came back and won the division again. And the year they didn't win the division was a wild card Super Bowl run where Tom Brady not only beat Taylor Heineke, where a legend was born in that game, he beat Drew Brees, he beat Aaron Rodgers, and he beat Patrick Mahomes. And Baker Mayfield steps into the limelight, wins the division there. And then I had a comparison for the Philadelphia Eagles to the Pittsburgh Steelers team that started 11-0 and then proceeded to lose every single game. And I'm like, this Philadelphia team gives me very similar vibe to that Steelers team. And then that Steelers team was knocked off by none other than Baker Mayfield in that game. So Baker has a chance to repeat history in a way now with them winning the division. We set the stage there. We've been preaching about Tampa versus Philadelphia for weeks before anyone else, and now that's fully come to light.
And now we have media pundits agreeing with our take now a month in advance.
A month later.
A month later.
2 months later, actually.
Yeah, because like the Eagles, we flash forward to week 13 when they beat the Bills. They were 10-1. Everything looked good. They looked like they could walk into the 1 seed at one point. And now, after what we saw against the Giants in this past week, terrible. Actually terrible game on every account. They were down 24-0 at one point in this game. And then they proceeded to mark the score up 27-10, but at the end of the day, I've never seen, especially in week 18 when there's implications on the line, you could potentially be the 2 seed and you're fighting for your division potentially. I've never seen a team go out there and look just effortless and just did not care about the outcome whatsoever, like I saw against the Eagles in this game.
Yeah, I think the problem was Nick Sirianni probably had a speech and he showed some clips of Steph Curry. And he was like, look at Steph Curry go out there and then look how he looks effortless. The Philadelphia Eagles hearing maybe not have been the best that day. Maybe they weren't paying attention. Like, coach wanted us to go out there and look effortless when really he wanted them to make it look effortless when they went out there. And then the Philadelphia Eagles took the completely wrong message from that motivational speech. And they're like, yeah, let's go out there and be effortless and prepare for the playoffs. When Nick Sirianni's like, no, that is completely the wrong message. How many times do we have to watch Rocky this week to prepare for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers? Because as far as I'm concerned, the Philadelphia Eagles didn't look that they wanted to be there. And then we had AJ Brown posting on his story about Jalen Hurts earlier this week where he's like, I don't want you to throw another interception and cost us the game, or I'm going to be in Dallas next year with number 4 at AT&T. And if you do lose us the game, don't post another motivational quote on your Instagram. So you had AJ Brown with some drama coming into this game where he was clearly unhappy. He's been unhappy with the direction that it's been going for a couple weeks now. And we've kind of seen Jalen Hurts regress a little bit this season. I don't know if that's injuries right now. However, if you're going to go out there and play through injuries, you do have to be open to criticism for those injuries. If you're going to play on the field, and Jalen Hurts has not looked good for a couple weeks now, and the Philadelphia Eagles were kind of scraping by the same way the Steelers did, winning one possession games versus the Bills and the Kansas City Chiefs. And then it all came to a head after they got destroyed by San Francisco. Then they get beat down by the Dallas Cowboys. And ever since then, they've kind of just been coming straight down a cliff, and they've lost 5 out of the past 6 games. You beat the Giants at home, but the fact that you're the team last year in the divisional round that destroyed the Giants, I believe it was like 48-10 in that game, something
Yeah.
like that, pretty badly, without Daniel Jones there to bless you with his inept awfulness being on the field, without Daniel Jones being garbage to turn the ball over and deliver gifts to your corners. He wasn't there to do that, and Tyrod Taylor was there. Tommy Cutlets even had some contributions in this game, and the Eagles just couldn't tackle. Like, how many times did guys just like, ugh, and guys were just running right by them? Saquon on a wheel route just gets wide open and behind the entire Philadelphia defense. And this is Jason Kelsey's last year, and this is his send off.
Yeah, it's sad to see a send off for such a great like for Jason Kelsey, and I don't really know what caused it. I don't know. We mentioned initially it was like maybe it was all these tough games they had to face. Maybe it was Jalen Hurts' health. But at this point, do you think this comes down to Nick Sirianni? Do you think he's lost the locker room? Like I've heard a lot of
Yeah.
things this week about should they fire Nick Sirianni. I was a fan of Nick Sirianni into the season. I know you were
Yeah.
too. So I don't know if that's necessarily the answer. Are there, rogue actors in the locker room that are kind of affecting the team chemistry? I don't know. But do you think that this is something where they should consider Nick Sirianni potentially being let go because of this?
I don't think you should let Nick Sirianni go because of this. I think the defense has been the main problem because they've been absolutely shredded on defense. And then you let CJ Gardner Johnson walk. Darius Slay is how old at this point? Like, how many years are we going to keep bringing back Darius Slay and saying he's a top corner in the league? And then you've had Jalen Carter, who looked really good at the beginning of the season. He's kind of disappeared here. You haven't said his name too much. And then you've had Fletcher Cox, who's older now. You have Brandon Graham, who's older now. So that's a defense that needs an overhaul. With Philadelphia, I wouldn't be surprised if they let Nick Sirianni go with how they treated Doug Peterson. And as soon as that situation started to fall apart, they've been a franchise that haven't been afraid to get off Andy Reid, who some people think is one of the best coaches, not named Bill Belichick in the modern era of the NFL. You let him go. So it's for Philadelphia, it's like, okay, is it fully on Nick Sirianni, or is it you see how well the Colts offense looks with Shane Steichen right now, and that looks like it's what's missing from the Philadelphia Eagles offense this year. You see how well Arizona's defense has overperformed this season, even though they haven't been the best team in the league. But Murphram and Practical Jokers showed you that there is some future in the desert there with the Arizona Cardinals,
Hmm.
especially if you get Marvin Harrison Jr. You're able to re-sign Hollywood Brown there, and then you have the Rondell Moores of the world, and maybe you go after some of these free agent signings. Maybe you get someone like a Frankie Louvu, maybe you get someone like a Christian Wilkins
Hmm.
or a Brian Burns there, but then you still have 2 first-round picks in Arizona, and then you're like, okay, was Nick Sirianni the motivator, and the other two are kind of the brains of the operation on offense and defense?
I don't know because I think that whoever they hired as both the offensive and the defensive coordinators, they took a considerable step back there, especially when you have Matt Patricia calling plays for defense.
That's a problem.
That's a big problem. And at this point, you can talk to a Detroit fan or a Patriots fan. Matt Patricia should not his name cannot be uttered in either of those cities for good reason because he's not a good head coach. He shouldn't even be in the NFL at this point. He's got the Adam Gase stain on him at this point. And I think that he'll probably, if he's smart, he should let go of both of those guys because both of them underperformed. I would point mostly to that defense, especially. The defensive coordinator was not good at the end of the day. He whiffed on that. I don't think he deserves to lose his job, though, because this is the same guy who
Yeah.
did turn around the Eagles, who did help build Jalen Hurts and have been able to build a pretty great team. I think right now there's some chemistry issues in there. Some of those guys are bound to retire. They have to do a revamp, but I don't think Nick Sirianni deserves to lose his job.
Yeah, I don't think he deserves to lose his job either here. And I think the main issue that they need to fix next year is going to be the secondary. And then also, D Swift is not the answer at running back. D Swift had some games where you're like, okay, I could work with that. That looks nice. But then you also are like, okay, I see why Detroit would rather replace D Swift and Jamal Williams with David Montgomery and Jameer Gibbs.
Yeah, exactly. And D Swift is a fine running back, but he's not the answer
Yeah.
for them.
So going into this game, do you have confidence more in the Tampa Bay Buccaneers or the Philadelphia Eagles?
I think I have no faith in the Eagles right now. If the
Yeah.
Eagles somehow win that game, whoever they face, whether it be the Cowboys, the Lions, or the 49ers, I don't put them as a chance at all. I think that they're going
Yeah.
to get annihilated. I don't know if the Bucks will annihilate them necessarily, but I think that they're going to take care of business against them because the way the Eagles' offenses look, Jalen Hurts is banged up, AJ Brown's banged up now, and their defense is getting shredded. Can Mike Evans get loose? Absolutely. Can Rashad White get loose? Absolutely. Can Kate Otten get it loose? Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Also, is like Jalen Hurts like completely absolved from criticism? Because I haven't seen anyone being like, "Oh yeah, Jalen Hurts should really take some of the blame here," because I've seen him throw some pretty terrible passes, and there's a few games you can point to. We give Josh Allen grief, we give Dak Prescott grief for not showing up in certain games, but at the end of the day, the Super Bowl came down to a Jalen Hurts fumble. And that was pretty much any possession you don't score, you're gonna lose the game. Jalen Hurts ends up getting stripped in that game. It's a fumble. It's tough. It happens, but at the same time, you are top three up there with Josh Allen in turnovers, and maybe necessarily he doesn't have the same capability as Josh Allen's in arm strength where he can overcome some of those turnovers, and he's turning more back into the Jalen Hurts from Alabama than the Jalen Hurts we saw in Oklahoma. So it's like, is Jalen Hurts completely absolved from blame? And is it a situation where Josh Allen loses Brian Dayball, has a weird off year last year and this year carrying back into it, and then Shane Steichen leaves, and then Jalen Hurts also struggles this year with turnovers as well because AJ Brown had the stretch where he has 5 straight games with 125 yards and a touchdown, and then we haven't heard from him. And then also, what happened to Devontae Smith as
Mm.
well? And Jalen Hurts has just been missing wide open guys all season.
Yeah. Plus, in this game, he had passing completions above 50%. So
Yeah.
we're talking about a guy who completed less than 50% of his throws against the Giants of all teams, a team that isn't known for a dynamic secondary by any means.
They're known for Bobby
Okereke
Okereke.
at this point, and I think you're right because if we're gonna compare Josh Allen and Jalen Hurts together, right? At least with Josh Allen, right? You can say, well, what he can do with his legs, and he is still able to. He still led the league in touchdowns at the end of the day. So at the end of the day, like Josh Allen, he deserves his criticism at the end of the day, whatever. But Jalen Hurts, on the other hand, some of the way that their offense has looked and how clunky it's looked when you have a top 10 wide receiver in AJ Brown, you have Devontae Smith, who last year looked pretty great at one point. You still have a solid tight end. You have all these weapons around you. You have the best offensive line in football, something that Josh
One of
Allen
them.
doesn't have. It's like, what's the excuse? What's causing it? And like, I understand Shane Steichen is a great brain in the operations, but losing your offensive coordinator should not be that dramatic of a fall,
Yeah.
especially if people are going to put you in the top 5. This is a team that made the Super Bowl last year. There is a Super Bowl hangover. That's a real thing. But what we're seeing with Jalen Hurts is something different. And I don't know if there's a Russell Wilson element to him with those comments and those quotes that people seem to not like. I personally don't really care about the quotes as much, but if you're
Yeah.
someone like AJ Brown, maybe you don't care about those quotes very much. Is it something where, the locker room is indifferent on him? I'm not entirely sure, but he deserves blame.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
It's not an excuse to miss open receivers, though. Like, there's been
Yeah.
plenty of times where you can point to the film on game winning drives that he's just missed Devontae Smith open. He's trying to force the ball to AJ Brown, and he gets too much tunnel vision on one set receiver where he's not seeing the whole field. And I feel like we've seen that plenty of times with Jalen Hurts, where he's definitely regressed to where he was last season in the MVP conversation, and he's nowhere near that this season. And if anyone was an MVP, it was AJ Brown on that team. So Philadelphia Eagles, we'll see what they do this weekend, but definitely some soul searching going forward from here. Another team that has some soul searching to do. Another team that's probably the most disappointing team. Another team that could almost walk into the 1 seed, talking about teams that completely bottomed out. Well, the Philadelphia Eagles at least made the playoffs. The Jacksonville Jaguars here. This was a team we both had high expectations for. Trevor Lawrence, one of the most beat up quarterbacks in the league, had an ankle, shoulder, and knee injury this year where he had a sprained knee. But that's not an excuse to have one of the most underperforming defenses in the league. You had a top 5 pass rusher in Josh Allen this year, who I believe was top 3 in sacks so far this season with 17 and a half. Yet your team was in the bottom of the league with pressures with a top 5 rusher this year. And then you have your corners who are getting cooked by Ryan Tannehill in a win or go home game. And then you have Trevor Lawrence, the prince who was promised, who is throwing not one, but 2 interceptions, giving the Titans momentum in this game. And then all you had to do was win or go home in this game. Ryan Tannehill probably isn't going to be on the Titans next year. Derrick Henry probably isn't going to be on the Titans next year. And then there are conversations about Mike Vrabel coming into this year, whether or not he's going to be with the Titans. And there's some discussions to be had there. But the Jaguars completely bottoming out, completely falling off a cliff. They lost how many games to finish the season when they were 10-3?
At one point they were 8-3, and they finished the season 9-8. So they went 1-6 to end it,
Yeah.
which is pathetic for a team that we mentioned going into the season. The reason why we were excited, you get Calvin Ridley, who's a great receiver. You have Christian Kirk there already, and their offense looked really dynamic last year. And you have Doug Peterson, Super Bowl winning head coach. So you have Trevor Lawrence also, who last year looked like a top 10 quarterback. And now this season, like, you looked at his numbers, you're like, these are fine numbers, but are these good numbers for somebody who's the prince that was promised? A guy that we were talking about 2 years before he was even drafted, a guy who was perennially in the national title game in Clemson. This is pathetic for a guy who, at this point, like, I can't call him a bust because he's still played decently, but he's definitely underwhelmed me so far in his first 3 years because the first year, you have Urban Meyer. Okay, we can erase that year. Everyone has that year. Last year, you're fine. 24 touchdowns, 8 picks. And now in this season, you regress. You have 24 touchdowns, 12 picks. And, like, there's no really good excuse for it at this point. You have a good running game, you have good receivers, and you have a good head
Yeah.
coach. And, like, I understand you have injuries, but at this point, like, is Trevor Lawrence, like, what is Trevor Lawrence at this point? Because at one point, he looks like he's a top 10 quarterback. And on the other side, it looks like he's a bottom 10 quarterback at any point.
Yeah.
Like, I don't understand. I don't know what to think of Trevor Lawrence at this point. Truly, at this point.
Yeah, and I think with Trevor, he was banged up at some point, so I'll give him somewhat of a pass this season, and I'll disagree because I feel like they have had some issues establishing a consistent run game, and it has felt like it was Travis Etienne, but most of Etienne's plays I felt like were either screens or toss plays, but they really weren't able to establish a consistent run game throughout the season. Tank Bigsby has looked like a bust so far. They weren't really using Dearness Johnson until the end of the season, but I don't think they were really able to establish a consistent run game. However, when you do have Christian Kirk there, you do have Calvin Ridley there, and you do have Evan Ingram there, that's weapons enough. And the fact that you were that bad to finish the season where all you had to do was win one of those games at the end of the year, and then in Tennessee, like, I picked the Titans to win this game just because I thought in Tennessee against Mike Vrabel that would be a tough environment, and the Jags just haven't looked that good to finish the season, but we shouldn't have gotten to this point to begin with. And then even when we watched the Jags earlier this year, we were like, I get they're winning, but it just doesn't look very good.
Mm.
It's like it seems like they have to struggle for every single yard, and then Trevor just, like, he doesn't hit that many big throws down the field. He's very accurate. He's good at layering the ball, but there are also some plays in this game. It's like you sailed it over Evan Ingram's head. Then you had Calvin Ridley wide open to potentially tie the game in this game, and I was like, no, you can't be making Jimmy Garoppolo plays in the Super Bowl where he overthrows Emmanuel Sanders. Like, no, you're Trevor Lawrence. You're the Prince who's promised. You're 6'6". You need to hit these plays down the field, and he just didn't practice at the end of the week for like 2 weeks here, and definitely some injuries and consistency was an issue. But that's also on Doug Peterson, where he wasn't able to establish a run game when he's an offensive head coach. He
Mm.
wasn't able to take pressure off of his quarterback. So some of it does fall on Trevor here, but some of it also falls on Doug Peterson here because while he did get to the Super Bowl, he has won a Super Bowl there. Jim Schwartz was the defensive coordinator. He had Frank Reich on his staff there. Nick Foles goes on this incredible run where you have Darren Sproles and Alshon Jeffrey playing out of their mind. Your defense is playing crazy, but after that, you had some questionable years with Doug Peterson. So, with a dysfunctional organization with the Jaguars, if they have the opportunity to go get Bill Belichick, I don't think Doug Peterson's job is safe if he plays like this next year because the Jaguars seem like the team, if any team was going to win their division, it was the Jaguars because we didn't know what the Texans were going to be. We didn't know what the Titans were going to be. And we didn't know what the Colts were going to be.
Mm.
But now you have Anthony Richardson coming back with the Colts. They'll be better than you next year. We have CJ Stroud getting more weapons. You have another draft and a free agency with a ton of cap space. They'll be a lot better next year. You may be the third best team in your division next year.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's a good point with Doug Peterson because after the Super Bowl, think about what he surrounded Carson Wentz with and how bad it was. He was throwing to Travis Fulgham at the end of it.
Yeah.
And that was an absolute disaster there. Takes a year off, goes to Jacksonville, and it felt like he did fix Trevor for a certain point, but like I don't like what can we really say of either of these two guys at this point? Because Doug Peterson, you take away this miraculous Super Bowl run, and what success have they actually had? He's won maybe two playoff games outside of that Super Bowl. And then in Jacksonville, he's underperformed. I mean,
Yeah.
this year we had them at 14-3. If they weren't 14-3, they should have at least been 11-6, 12-5 with the team that they had there. I know their defense I was never in love with, but like Trayvon Walker, he's been disappointing for them. And then their
Oh,
secondary has been
yeah, Trayvon Walker. Good point there. Because we were talking about that yesterday. Mr. Dinosaur Arms and Aiden Hutchinson, they're like, oh, his arms are too short. We can't take him. Let's take Trayvon Walker. Who was taken after Trayvon Walker in that draft?
We had Aiden Hutchinson.
Yep.
We had Derek Stingley. We had Sauce Gardner. We had
Reek.
Kayvon Thibodeau.
Reek Woolen.
Reek Woolen as well. Pretty much all of the edge rushers taken after Trayvon Walker were better in the top 5, keep in mind.
Yeah.
So I think it's safe to say they whiffed on that one because I would take Kayvon Thibodeau over him too.
Yeah, Trayvon Walker has definitely been disappointing. They tried to switch him to another position there, but the Jaguars, it's like you should have been the 1 seed this year, and you were in it against the Ravens on Sunday Night Football, and they were moving the ball down the field, and then Trevor Lawrence makes two of the dumbest plays I've ever seen where suddenly he looks like Daniel Jones out there and has no idea what he's doing. And some of those fumbles, I'm just like, what the hell is this?
Yeah, that's the thing with him. He fumbles, he throws interceptions, and he doesn't put up enough production for me to be like, wow, this is definitely a top 10 quarterback. I
Yeah.
see it when I watch the games. I see the talent there. I see why he was taken number 1, but he just doesn't string it enough consistently enough. And
Yeah.
at this point, like I feel like he's somewhat of a Kyler figure where, and I've definitely seen Kyler have his moments too, where he plays out of his mind one game and he has a great game, and then he just doesn't string along the consistency. For
Yeah.
Trevor, he's kind of giving me that same vibe where yes, he's good and he's consistent, and it's hard for me to say they should move on from him. But at the same time, like at some point, you got to elevate your team. And at
Yeah.
this point, I know he was hurt. Maybe I should cut him slack. Maybe I shouldn't. I don't know. But next year, if they have another season like this, you really got to start to consider because you have CJ Stroud and Anthony Richardson in your division.
Yeah, I think next year you have to fix the defense and then you have to establish a run game. And then if Trevor Lawrence is disappointing, we move off of Doug Peterson. And then with Trevor, it's like we have to get over 30 touchdowns. It's like you cannot be in the 24 to 28 touchdown range. It's fine, but you're also the number 1 pick in that draft. That draft is not looking good right now. And then you had a chance to just walk to the number 1 seed. It's like it's absolutely ridiculous how you
Mhm.
guys fell apart. Versus the Texans and the Colts this year, it's like, okay, well, both of those teams are looking like they're going to be better than you next year. And then talent wise, CJ Stroud looks like he's better just as a leader. Seems like he has his guys working a lot harder there. Seems like he's putting in more work than Trevor Lawrence. And then Anthony Richardson seems like he's going to be an absolute freak of an athlete, which has more, I feel like he has the highest ceiling out of both of those quarterbacks. Maybe CJ Stroud's better at being a quarterback, but just as an all around athlete, you're looking at the return of Cam Newton.
Yeah, exactly. So the Jags should definitely be nervous, especially because if the Texans go out and get T. Higgins, at this point they probably have the third best receiver core at that point
Yeah.
because of what Josh Downs can do, because of what Michael Pittman can do. If the Colts can go out and get a tight end as well, get a nice solid like Sam Laporta figure there.
Oh, you don't like Mo Alley Cox?
Nobody likes Mo Cox.
Oh, come on, that's mean.
Oh please, name a Mo Cox play ever.
I can't.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
That time Gardner overthrew him.
Yeah, that time. Yeah, exactly. But the Jags, they're in some serious trouble because they're slipping fast in that division, and I just don't know what they can do.
Yeah, and I think next year you could turn it around and potentially, I mean, the AFC North, but the AFC South could compete with the AFC North for the best division in football, especially if the Titans have a return to form. Very quickly, Derrick Henry gave a speech. Very odd to see a player do this, but he grabbed the mic at the end of the game, basically thanked everyone in Tennessee for everything they did for him. So it's seeing like he's going to walk next year. Thoughts on Derrick Henry leaving and just the legacy he's leaving behind in Tennessee?
Well, what have we seen from Derrick Henry the last 7 years with Tennessee? Well, running all over teams and being the worst nightmare. And he had one last hurrah with them. It's almost like Kobe's last game where he had 60 points. Well, in this game he had 150. And not only did he thank the Steelers fan base, not only did he thank the Texans fan base, but he also thanks the Bills fan base as well. And he waves goodbye to the Jacksonville Jaguars fans who are probably getting somewhere poured beer on by David Tepper.
Yeah.
But one last hurrah for him, one last hurrah for Ryan Tannehill and potentially Mike Vrabel. And he might not be the same player that he was, but he's still definitely a very solid, great running back. And
Yeah.
I want to see where he goes. We've talked about the Cowboys as a landing spot, Eagles potentially.
Yeah.
As a landing spot. Definitely think he'll go somewhere in the NFC. But one last hurrah for him for somebody who's arguably the best running back we've seen.
Yeah, the thing with the Titans is they had the worst offensive line in the league this year. So with Derrick Henry, it's like it's a little bit tough to get some production going when the guy's in front of you. It's like there's only so much you can do when you have a 30-year-old running back trying to make something out of nothing. I'm glad to see him though stick it to his division rival in the Jacksonville Jaguars, showing that they were frauds and didn't deserve to make the playoffs, rushing for 150 yards. So it was nice to see him do that, but as a contender next year, I think it'd be great to pair him with someone like Tony Pollard in Dallas. Maybe Tampa Bay could use him next year. I think the Rams, Derrick Henry and Kyron Williams, we know how Sean McVay loves his stars there. So I think the Rams could potentially be the best option for Derrick Henry to
Yeah.
take that team up over the top, especially with Sean McVay's run schemes, or the Philadelphia Eagles with their running schemes as well. But I think either of those teams would be a great fit for Derrick Henry, and it's nice to see him go out on a high note in Tennessee with no bad blood.
Yeah, exactly. And also to thank all those teams that he helped make the playoffs as well.
Yeah. Yeah, all the teams he helped make the playoffs there, but there's some other teams that Derrick Henry helped make the playoffs. What do we have for games coming up here?
I feel like a lot of these games we can quickly brush over. Do we even bother talking about the games where we bench starters?
Where we bench starters? Not really. Like the Browns and the Bengals. Congrats, Bengals.
Jake Browning being a starter potentially in the NFL.
Jeff Driscoll making a start for the Browns, playing pretty poorly. He just seemed like he was a character out of Red Dead Redemption 2.
Yeah, Jets beat the Patriots for the first time since 2014. Patriots have the lowest passing or total yardage since 1993.
Yeah.
That's nothing new there.
Thoughts on Bill Belichick? It's a lot of mixed news, a lot of negativity around Bill Belichick, a lot of slander here. Just listening to the local media in New England here talking about Bill Belichick, people are like, "Yeah, I want this guy," and they're like, "The stench of Bill Belichick," and it's like it just seems like the conversation around Bill Belichick has gotten so like venomous and disrespectful. And I know he's not the most pleasant guy in the media, but at the end of the day, he is human. He did bring this franchise 6 Super Bowls. He is the greatest coach ever, as far as I'm concerned. He's the greatest defensive mind football has ever seen. The fact that they're like, oh, the stench of Bill Belichick. How about the stench of how people smell who are on Boston radio? Where guys like Wiggy, Fourier, and then you have Felger and Maz. You want to talk about a greasy guy? Listen to Maz. And then they're just like talking about Bill Belichick like he's some scrub. Like, I'm so excited to see him leave here, when really just take away his GM powers if he accepts that. I'm fine with him staying as the head
Mhm.
coach as the Patriots, but I've seen a bunch of Patriots like pages on social media like we need to get this guy out of here, but I'm like what is the alternative to the greatest coach of all time? Like, please tell me who's going to come in here and be a better head coach than Bill Belichick? Unless the only thing in return is just you have a different general manager. It's like, that's a good argument. But saying Bill Belichick, the coach, needs to leave here, I'm like, why is this so disrespectful?
Yeah, I agree. And we talked about Dennis Allen, and how he's performed defensively for them. The Patriots defense was a top 10 defense this year,
Without Judon,
and Christian Gonzalez as well. So it's like their defense was not the problem. The problem is that their offense was on the level of the Carolina Panthers for how bad they were.
yeah,
And there's a lot of things to blame there, GM wise, for Bill Belichick. Why did he keep Mac Jones? Why did he not give him weapons? Why did he not bolster the offensive line when they lost some players? But at the end of the day, coaching wise, I mean, yeah, they were 4-13, but they were close in a lot of these games. And really the issue was that their offense couldn't do anything at all.
yeah,
And they had 100 yards of offense against this Jets game. And at the end of the day, if they can get an offense that's competent at this point, if they can get a top 16 offense, this team is still going to be competitive. It's going to be
yeah.
kind of reminds me of what the Titans were last year. Although they didn't make the playoffs, they'd still be in the mix there. It's like Bill Belichick's still a great coach, and there's a reason why the Commanders and the Raiders and the Cowboys and all these other teams that are linked to him are interested
Yeah.
because he can still elevate a team. He just needs a quarterback at the end of the day.
Yeah, he's the GOAT, and also you have a chance to get Drake May. It's like, why aren't we running it back? And like, if you give Bill Belichick a chance to Drake May, he kind of looks like a Josh Allen type of player. You watch some of the tape on him coming out of the draft, or Jaden Daniels, who could be one of these Anthony Richardson type figures coming into the season this year. It's like, why wouldn't you give Bill Belichick the opportunity to go on another incredible run here? And then if he said in his press conference this morning that if relinquishing like some general managing powers is something I have to do to keep coaching, like that's something I'll consider here. So if you can get him to relinquish some of those, maybe you go back out here and get Nick Casario to come in and be the GM. If that's what it's gonna take, then okay, let's do that.
Yeah, I don't think that's a bad solution at all, especially because they have cap space. They have a shit ton of cap space. They're one
Yeah.
of those teams that could bolster up their team in free agency.
Yeah, but will I be happy to see him coach the Dallas Cowboys after they lose to Green Bay in the first round? Absolutely. Which is a
Yes.
good game to pivot to. The Green Bay Packers go out there versus the Chicago Bears, who are not only one of the hottest teams in football. I feel like Matt Eberflus has really, ever since they got Montez Sweat, turned that defense around, and it's just so unfortunate that they started so poorly because they finished the season so hot. Their defense looked like a top 5 defense the past few weeks, if not one of the hottest defenses in the NFL. However, Jordan Love held up the deed and he was like, oh, wait a minute. Aaron Rodgers gave me this deed. I still own the Chicago Bears here. And you know how we own the Chicago Bears? Not only are they holding teams to 3 yards a carry, but I'm going to do it with Aaron Jones and we're going to rush for 6 yards a carry versus the Chicago Bears. Move the ball up and down the field. And then Aaron Rodgers also gave me this thing. It's called, oh, yeah, being really great at throwing the football, throwing it to guys who no one knows who they are. Skip Bayless was on the show today. He's like, I mean, Dontavian Wicks, Tucker Kraft. He's like, who are these guys? And they're all rookies. This is the youngest team in the league. And then Jordan Love goes up against the Chicago Bears, who he owns. He has the deed in his hands, and then brings the Packers to the playoffs in a win or go home in a situation that even Aaron Rodgers can do against the Detroit Lions last year, which was a situation where the Lions hadn't beat them twice in a season in like 2 decades. And then
Yeah.
Jordan Love did that, takes the Packers to the playoffs. How impressed were you to see them move the football up and down the field? And how confident are you in the Packers going into the playoffs where they have a pretty interesting record? You have the unsealed documents against the Green Bay Packers and the Dallas Cowboys with a healthy Aaron Jones, with a healthy Jair Alexander, and a team that is so young, they don't know what they're not supposed to know.
Yeah, I mean, in the last 10 games, the Packers have won 9 of their games against the Cowboys. So you're talking about a team. They own the Bears, but they also own the Cowboys as well. So do I feel confident that they can beat the Cowboys? Yeah. You know why? Because let me check real quick for the Packers. Oh yeah, they have a winning record. And I know the Cowboys, they beat the Eagles, who look fraudulent now. And, their winning record against winning teams is not very good. However, the Packers with Jordan Love, there's a lot of throws in this game where I see Jordan Love and I go, "Oh, this guy's actually pretty good."
Yeah.
And without Trayvon Diggs and them relying on Deron Bland, who gets cooked constantly,
Stephon Gilmore popped his shoulder in that game. He's
yeah,
gonna play, but he may just have one arm.
yeah, exactly. So the Packers, if Aaron Jones, which I feel like what was missing for them for part of the season was him being banged up, him being back, they have AJ Dillon, they have a bunch of young receivers who none of them are necessarily spectacular, but all of them are good, and that's
Yeah.
what matters. Um, yeah, I think that they could definitely beat the Packers, and I hope they do. That's what we're rooting for.
Yeah, and then you have Jordan Love. The past 8 games, he has 18 touchdowns to 1 interception. And then you're like, huh, who do you think is better at this point, Jordan Love or Tua Tagovailoa? I was like, oh yeah, Jordan Love. And then you see the Dallas Cowboys go to Miami and then lose to the Dolphins. I'm like, I don't think like the Cowboys are necessarily just going to walk all over this Cowboys team. And the Packers defense looked impressive yesterday. And if we get Jair Alexander to turn back the clock just a little bit, all he has to do is just have a few plays where he throws CD off of his game. The Cowboys can't run the football against good teams. And that's the problem with Tony Pollard. And it's CD Lamb or bust. And I don't think you can be a one dimensional offense versus this Green Bay Packers team. And this Packers team has shown on the biggest stages, Thanksgiving. What do? They destroy the Lions in their house, who should have beaten the Dallas Cowboys, who did beat the Dallas Cowboys, as far as I'm concerned. And then they beat Patrick Mahomes, albeit in Lambeau, but on Sunday Night Football. Jordan Love plays out of his mind. I think in this game, when you talk about quarterback play making the difference, I think Jordan Love is going to outplay Dak Prescott.
Yeah, I mean, Jair Alexander can shut down Justin Jefferson. I mean, he's done that multiple times in his past. And I would put Justin Jefferson above CD Lamb, although he was banged up this year. And so if he can do what he does to Justin Jefferson to CD Lamb, who else are they going to throw it to?
Yeah,
They're
or
going
you
to throw it to Brandon Cooks. They're going to throw it to Jake Ferguson at the end of the day. And I think that they can definitely contain Tony Pollard as well. So you take away their biggest offensive weapon in CD Lamb, which is going to be a tall task, no doubt about it. But if they can do that, I don't see the Cowboys scoring more than 14 points.
Yeah, and I think this will be a tough, gritty game, but I think the Packers game was really impressive how they beat the Bears. Then a lot of people were talking about how impressive it was that the Cowboys beat the Commanders. And I was
I
like,
don't even want to
really?
talk about that.
With Sam Howell, with a defense that's been completely, they're like, oh, look, the Cowboys have a run game again with Tony Pollard versus the Washington Commanders. I'm like, you mean the team that traded away Montez Sweat and
Has the worst
Chase
defense
Young?
statistically,
Yeah, and has the worst defensive.
and just fired Ron Rivera and
Yeah,
just hired Bob Myers as their GM.
I believe they've lost the most games consecutively.
They lost 8 straight.
8 straight.
They ended the season 0-8. Yeah, congratulations, Cowboys.
Yeah, so it's like games like that, and I feel like this season more than any, people have bought into the Cowboys delusion, when I feel like this Cowboys team is really not that different than the teams we've gotten in the past. It's a lot of recency bias, but this team doesn't have Trayvon Diggs. It's probably going to be Stephon Gilmore with one arm here. Deron Bland has shown that he can get cooked. So it's like, I didn't really think that game was that impressive with the Dallas Cowboys. You're playing for the 2 seed, which you fraudulently got from the refs in that game where they handed it to you. And the NFL has a little bit of way of handing out some karma, and you're going up against a team who you haven't beat in 9 games. And then Mike McCarthy going up his own team. It's like all the pressure is on the Cowboys to beat the Packers in this game. And then you're going up a Commanders team who just let go of Ron Rivera. You're probably cleaning house. And then the Commanders hire Bob Myers from the NBA, like, to help, I don't know, guess he's good with people, I guess. So he's going to help evaluate the personality of the next head coach here. It's like, what other sport besides the NFL brings in baseball guys and NBA guys? Because I don't see baseball being like, you know what? You know who we need to bring in to evaluate some talent here? Let's bring in Mike Shanahan because he's good with offense. So maybe he can evaluate some people there. Let's bring in Andy Reid to evaluate this nice basketball player out of Oklahoma there. Maybe he can help us hire some people. It's like, what other sport does this?
Well, don't forget about the Dallas Mavericks. You know how bad they are on defense. Bill Belichick potentially available. let's just say maybe Bill Belichick's in Dallas next year, and it's not the Cowboys. All jokes aside, I don't know what to think of this move because it doesn't like if it works out, it's going to be the ultimate chess move. But if we're looking historically at moves like this, historically this doesn't work at
No.
all. This happened in baseball with, I believe, the Mets, failed miserably with them. And other than that, it's like it's another sport, completely different sport. And you're talking about hiring Steve Kerr, who obviously brought the titles to Golden State with Steph Curry, generational talent, Klay Thompson, Draymond Green. It's a little bit different to manage an NBA team with 15 players than have a head coach continuously motivate people to basically torture themselves week in and week out for 17 weeks. And if you're lucky, 20 weeks of the season.
Yeah.
So I don't know how much insight he's going to have. I don't know what he can do, but it's very questionable to start so far with the new owner, Josh Harris.
And Magic Johnson there. And it could be the Magic Johnson connection because they probably go to a lot of shoulder rubbing events in California and run into each other there. But I see like a lot of commentators who like this move. And for me, that just kind of shows you're casual. You're kind of handed your talking points like, yes, you should promote this as a good idea. Bring in an NBA guy to oversee an NFL franchise. But like, no, we need to stop this. We need to bring in NFL guys. You need to run like a functional NFL organization. We're not bringing in basketball guys to evaluate our next head coaches in the toughest sport to evaluate talent. Like, what are we doing? Like, I don't like this move at all. And I think it's just another bad sign for the Commanders here. Need a full rebrand, new uniforms, new everything. And starting with a basketball guy, what is he going to teach players how to flop now? Like, come on.
Yeah, it's a mess. I have a feeling this will be a disaster for them. Other games really to go over. Every other game, like Raiders and Broncos, Antonio Pierce might
Yeah.
solidify himself there.
Antonio Pierce, I think he does deserve another chance. We were looking at his coaching past, and it was mostly he was like a linebacking coach at Arizona State, ended up working his way up to being a defensive assistant there, and then his first job in the NFL was with the Raiders as a linebacking coach here. So really, if there's any trepidation, it would be he doesn't have too much experience there. However, you did compare him to a Dan Campbell type figure who is a fan of that organization, is a tough guy who's played in the NFL before and a fan of that team. He is from the trenches in Oakland, so he fits the vibe of the Oakland Raiders. Max Crosby likes him a lot, so if you want to keep your team happy, I think that's a good decision. And also, look at how much that defense improved since Antonio Pierce took over. That team definitely plays with another edge. He allowed you to win without completing a pass after a first quarter in a game versus the Kansas City Chiefs, which I think is something special to be seen there. So he's shown he can go toe to toe with teams like the Chiefs and then take a win off of them, take a win off the Broncos this year. Raiders end up sweeping that series against them. And then he can also play competitive versus the Chargers. So I think Antonio Pierce brings a good toughness, physicality to that team, which I think is something they've been lacking with someone who's kind of a Fruit Loop like Josh McDaniels, someone who's kind of a weirdo like John Gruden, even though he's a great commentator. But those emails definitely very weird.
Too many gamer words in there.
Yeah, too many Call of Duty World War II lobby words in there by John Gruden, and then you had who's the guy they had before as the head coach?
Jack Del Rio.
Jack Del Rio, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, with his connection with the Raiders, you talk about Detroit and what we've seen with Dan Campbell, how he's been able to not just gravitate the players themselves, but also the city of Detroit. And if we've seen the success with Detroit, we should gravitate to mimicking that, similar to what we've seen with the Sean McVay era in the NFL as well. He's been there. He played for the Raiders. He's from Oakland. And if we've seen them play as tough as they've had the last several weeks since he's took over for him, I would love to see a Raiders team that was as good as they were in the 80s, because that's really like the peak Raiders era was back in the 80s when they had a tough defense and a solid quarterback. Really, the only thing missing on this team right now is a quarterback. So whether it's going after somebody like a Kirk Cousins, if he wants to go to Vegas, I don't think that fits him very much, but
no.
But
maybe Justin Fields.
You can go after someone like Justin Fields, who I think would fit there. You can go, maybe you go in the draft and draft somebody. Your draft pick's low enough to maybe trade up for it. But at the end of the day, it's like the only thing that's really missing is their quarterback because you have Devontae there. He's signed up. You have Renfro. You have Josh Jacobs, we don't know whether he stays or not, but maybe he does. Um,
Michael Mayer has been pretty good.
Michael Mayer's been a really good tight end for them, and their defense. It's like they have talent there. So it's like if we look at the rest of that division, the Chiefs could lose Travis Kelsey. I don't think the Chiefs are falling off necessarily, but there's questions there. And then the Chargers are the Chargers, and the Broncos organization's not happy with what they did with Russell Wilson, the
No.
players within there. So there's tension there. So would I be surprised to see the Raiders, if they keep Antonio Pierce, to be somewhere in the second place in that division? Absolutely not.
Yeah, I think they could be the second place team there, and then he would be able to pick his own staff, bring in a new offensive coordinator, bring in a new quarterback if Aiden O'Connell isn't the guy there, but I definitely think he deserves another shot. And the only thing you'd be concerned about is he's not a offensive head coach, but I really don't think that matters when it comes to someone having that much of a gravitational personality in the locker room, someone who's able to motivate the team that much without Josh McDaniels, someone who was trying to stick his neck out for Josh McDaniels a little bit, and then Josh McDaniels was just weird. He's like, "Don't talk about the Patriots that way," and then he's like, "Okay." He just did that, and then Max Crosby's like, "Yeah, let's go." So I think when you have someone who's able to just inspire the team that much, that doesn't come around that often, and I think they are going to learn from the mistakes that they made with Richie Bisaccia, where he sat there and wrote 53 handwritten notes to every single player on that team for thanking them for letting him be their head coach. So I think you have to learn from your mistakes. You're still paying Josh McDaniels and John Gruden, so you might as well get a little bit of a discount because he doesn't have that much experience.
Yeah, exactly. And like I know that they're linked to Jim Harbaugh, and I know Jim Harbaugh is a big name, and the Davis family is really into those big splash moves like we saw with Devontae Adams. But at the end of the day, it's like let the Chargers have Jim Harbaugh. Let him go there. He wants to go there. That makes
Yeah.
sense. You have somebody that's in house who's going to be cheap. You're already paying Josh McDaniels all this money and John Gruden. It's like why go out there and pay another $15 million to someone like Jim Harbaugh, who's going to get a head coaching job elsewhere anyways? You might as well stay with Antonio Pierce at this point because
Yeah.
he fits the culture. He has a culture that's already been established in these few games. You'd be a fool not to keep him.
Yeah, you'd be a fool not to keep them. So I'm excited for the Raiders. I think out of the Chargers, the Broncos, I think they have the best future going forward from there. Don't think anyone's going to dethrone the Chiefs anytime soon unless Andy Reid retires or Patrick Mahomes demands a trade, which I don't think is going to happen anytime soon. But I think perennially you'd be able to compete for second place there with him. So excited to see that. Let's stay in the West, but shift over to another game. We had Seattle, Arizona. Some interesting storylines coming out of this game. The Seattle Seahawks had a chance to be the 5 seed if they ended up beating the Dallas Cowboys in that game. However, the notorious, the awful, the disgraceful Brad Allen was reffing that game, gave the Cowboys the win, gave them like 270 yards of penalties in that
Mhm.
game. And then we've kind of seen Geno Smith be okay this year. We've seen a lot of inconsistency from that young talent. But on the flip side, the Cardinals were supposed to be terrible this year. They're supposed to be one of the worst teams in the league, and they were. However, it didn't really feel like that, and it felt like there are a lot of positive storylines to take. It felt like when Kyler came back, Kyler actually looked good. Kyler looked like an elite quarterback at times when he came back, and then you have the chance to go out there and get Marvin Harrison Jr., which I think they will. So going forward, are you more confident in the Seattle Seahawks or the Arizona Cardinals future?
Um, I think the fact that the Cardinals have 2 first round picks this year, and one of them being a top 4 pick, if they can go out there and get Maserati Marv, and they can go out,
Messer.
that's his nickname, and then they can go out there and get another solid maybe edge rusher. I mean, their defense, I don't think is as far away as it might look on paper. Plus, their cap space isn't really that bad off either because they're not really paying anybody outside of Kyler at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Like Hollywood Brown could walk. James Conner is on a pretty fair contract. You can keep James Conner, draft a running back. And then after that, it's like offensive linemen, a lot of them are young. Defensive players, it's like Buda Baker's paid, but you're not paying anybody. So you can go out there in free agency sign a couple of defensive players. Maybe it's Brian Burns.
Yeah.
Arizona's a great place to live, so it's not like it's not a terrible destination for him.
It's a great destination. Jason Tatum wanted to go there specifically because he took a drive through the hills and saw the mansions. He's like, "Whoa, this
Yeah,
is
it's
cool."
no, Arizona's great. Been there many times. Beautiful place. And so you can get someone like a Brian Burns in free agency. Maybe you sign somebody like some of the linebackers there, and that Cardinals team is back up there. And if you can maintain a Hollywood Brown or sign somebody in free agency, then you'll be in business. You'll have a really solid tight end. You'll have a really solid running back, and potentially the best wide receiver prospect of all time, which is what they're raving him up to be. So Cardinals are in business. I'm excited for them. And then as for the Seahawks, it's like they have a lot of nice players on their team. I like Kenneth Walker. Obviously, we love DK Metcalf and we like some players on their defense, but I have my questions at quarterback with Geno Smith and Drew Lock. And I feel like their solution, they're kind of in this weird place where they're in the middle of the NFC, but also just in the NFL in general, where their leap would be trading for a quarterback, but they might not have the cap space to do it. And they don't have the draft capital to draft a quarterback. So
Yeah.
they're going to need somebody to sit behind Geno Smith. And the players that they could get at that draft, it's like you're just looking at someone like a Bo Nix or Michael Penix potentially. And we don't know. Those guys are a little bit more of a gamble than the big three that we're seeing: Jaden Daniels, Drake May, and Caleb Williams.
Well, Russ was taken, round 3. Dak was taken round 4. Brock Purdy, Mr. Irrelevant, wasn't taken very high. David Blau, was not terribly high.
Yeah. Yeah. Mention him with all those guys. Yeah.
Yeah, mention David Blau with all those guys. Know you're a huge fan. I feel like, yeah, but Geno Smith, you are right. They are in a middle of the ground area where it's like I feel like he's not going to be the guy. He's not going to be the guy against San Francisco here. So definitely a lot of soul searching for the Seattle Seahawks. And then it's also like Pete Carroll. How many years is he going to do this? He's pretty old at this point. So I feel like
70.
we have to get the ball rolling in the next 2 or 3 years here if he's going to make another run with this team. So I'm excited to see what both these teams do, but definitely more excited to see what Arizona does next year than Seattle. And I think they'll be able to make that leap and then start being a contender again with Kyler.
Yeah. Because I don't think they're too far out, especially with how the 49ers,
Yeah.
which I guess we can pivot to the Rams and Niners game because we did have a Carson Wentz sighting, although they were against the starters. But Puka Nacua, record-breaking year, most catches and most receiving yards for a rookie in NFL history. Um, I know that CJ Stroud is the favorite for the offensive rookie of the year. Do you think that there's a conversation to be had with Puka Nacua potentially outpacing him there?
Yeah, I think rookie of the year is fine if it's CJ Stroud. However, offensive rookie of the year, Puka Nacua has been the most dominant. He came out of nowhere. CJ Stroud, number 2 pick, turned around the franchise. He's more of someone who should be in the MVP conversation. However, the numbers were gaudy for Puka Nacua. He's breaking records here, and he did miss a few games this season with injury. So it's not like it's because of the 17-game season that he broke those records. He just broke the records by having a Pokemon name and being an absolute baller this season for the Rams. Well, Cooper Cup was not there, getting touchdowns and then just absolutely tormenting defenses. So I feel like Puka Nacua does deserve that nod over CJ Stroud, and then I'm fine with giving CJ Stroud the rookie of the year. Just give the offensive player of the year to the wide receiver. It's not fair if the quarterback gets to take all of that. So I'm fine if you just split the award so everyone's happy.
Yeah, I think that's fair because Puka Nakoa's had a record-breaking season, and CJ Stroud's had a great season. But at the end of the day, like if Puka Nakoa doesn't get any awards, I know he's a Pro Bowler, which I know we haven't talked about the Pro Bowl roster quite yet, because we haven't talked about the Lions game. That's the last game to talk about. But he's got the Pro Bowl nod. I think he deserves to be Offensive Rookie of the Year.
Yeah, he definitely deserves to be it. But he's up there with these guys like Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, CeeDee Lamb, AJ Brown, Jalen Waddle with what he's done coming into the league. And I feel like just technically, like he wasn't a first round draft pick. He was slept on in the draft. Even the Rams were not sure what he was going to be. And then he just came out there and then balled coming into the season. So I feel like he's just so proficient in route running, it's definitely special to see. And I'm excited to see him in the playoffs side by side with Cooper Cup. And that's going to be a really good duo going forward, especially if the Rams go out there and pay someone like a Derrick Henry. They can be right back in there in contention for the NFC West title, not necessarily just a wild card next year, but definitely a great showing from him. Then happy also to see Carson Wentz go out there and have a great game. He was someone I was like, Jets, hello, Carson Wentz is out there. He's not a bad quarterback. He's just, for some reason, he's been blacklisted from the NFL. I know RG3 is like, yeah, players like me, players like Colin Kaepernick, players like Carson Wentz. But like Carson Wentz, out of all those players, was probably the best out of any of them. And he was a borderline starter with the Commanders, but his coach hated him and Ron Rivera, threw him under the bus, and ran him over.
Let's also say the Commanders. Like, you want to talk about Baker Mayfield, the renaissance he had. Where did he come from? The Panthers, terrible organization. Carson Wentz, Commanders, terrible organization.
Yeah. And then Carson Wentz was run over for that Colts season when it clearly was on Frank Reich because Shane Steichen immediately turned them around. Carson Wentz looked like a good quarterback in this game. It's like he could have gone to the Jets, been really good. He could have gone to the Falcons and balled out. And I feel like if he was on the Falcons or the Saints this year, I feel like Carson Wentz is better than Derek Carr. And I feel like people just hate on him for no reason. But he was the number 2 pick in that draft with Jared Goff. So I feel like he's someone who's got too much hate. But this game just validated for me that Carson Wentz should have been picked up by one of these teams and should have been playing football this year,
Yeah.
especially in a year where most of the quarterbacks were getting hurt.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think he played good enough this game where he gets another opportunity. I think the
Yeah.
Rams will retain him.
Even the Vikings. You don't want to see Carson Wentz throwing to Justin Jefferson? Like,
He would
he
love him.
has the arm talent to do it. His problem is just he tries too hard.
He tries too
He
hard, but in
tries
the
too
end,
hard.
it doesn't even matter.
But in the end,
Speaking of the Vikings game, Lions get their revenge game, right?
Yeah.
You know, taking on the Vikings, they sweep them again. And then Justin Jefferson has 1,000-yard season despite missing 7 games. So credit to Justin Jefferson. And then the Lions. Big story out of this, they lost Sam Laporta potentially. He might still suit up for the Rams game. But thoughts on this? And then also Amon-Ra St. Brown snubbed from the Pro Bowl. We talked about that while we were watching the game. But thoughts on all those things there, and then Amon-Ra missing the Pro Bowl.
Yeah, Amon-Ra missing the Pro Bowl is wild to me, especially because I feel like Mike Evans had a down year. He had a lot of drops this season. Amon-Ra was also utilized in the run game a lot this year. So if you look at the pass yards side by side, you can it's not even an argument with Mike Evans because Amon-Ra had a better year and he was utilized more in the offense than Mike Evans was. Was Mike Evans used in motion coming out of the backfield in the offense, and was he rushing for touchdowns this year in a Deebo Samuel type of role? Absolutely not. Was he blocking in the run game the same way Amon-Ra St. Brown was this year? Absolutely not. So I felt like Amon-Ra should have gotten that nod this year. And I felt like he had a great season. So he definitely should have been a Pro Bowler. DJ Moore was someone who I also felt like was snubbed. He was top. He was 7th this year in receiving yards. So I felt like he was another person I'd probably put over Mike Evans. And then Sam Laporta going down. It's definitely tough to see. And a lot of people are criticizing the Lions for playing their starters, but he's a rookie this year. It's the NFL, injuries happen, and you're also playing for a 2 seed where you look at the Cowboys like, okay, they've been bad on the road this year. They're going up against the division rival. It's probably Ron Rivera's last game, so let's go out there and compete and take some momentum into the playoffs. And then also the Eagles have been falling off. You probably expected them to lose to the Giants in that game, so I have no problem with them starting there. And then just the Lions being able to go out there and beat the Minnesota Vikings twice in the season. I thought that was really good to see. And then also having CJ Gardner-Johnson back is going to be huge because
Yeah.
not only did he get his first interception of this year after leading last year in turnovers in the league with fumble recoveries and interceptions, but he's also going to be the quarterback for that secondary, making sure everyone's in the right position, making sure that we're not giving up stupid plays. So now you have CJ Gardner-Johnson, Alex Anzalone, and then Aiden Hutchinson, which is elite player, and elite player in each level of the defense. So that's going to be a huge gain for the Lions. And also having a Lee McNeil back is going to be great. And I think just David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs ascending for the Lions. And then you saw the difference between Jamal Williams, D Swift, and then David Montgomery having his best year as a pro, and then Jahmyr Gibbs showing that he was the best running back in the draft. And then you also got the best tight end in the draft. I think you rest him versus the Rams. Maybe you have him on the sideline, but Brock Reich is a fine tight end. He's still a good blocker there, but you really want him healthy for that either Dallas Cowboys game or Tampa Bay Buccaneers game for when the Packers potentially beat the Cowboys.
Yeah, it looks like he should be able to suit up for the Rams game. I don't have any problem with them playing starters because would you rather face the Packers or the Rams? The Rams, I feel like, are a harder team to beat right now than the Packers. Because the Lions, I know that they lost on Thanksgiving, but before that, they annihilated the Packers, and they have that film, and they know what to take care of. So, like them trying to get the 2 seed, I don't have any problem with that at all, and I don't think the rest of us should either. I don't think it should matter.
Yeah,
The injuries would have happened anyways, and it's just I don't know. I think people are just trying to knit at the Lions as they can, but Amon-Ra St. Brown, absolutely. The numbers back up him being a Pro Bowler over Mike Evans. I don't have any problem with CeeDee Lamb, AJ Brown, or Puka Nacua being Pro Bowlers. Those guys deserve it, absolutely. But Mike Evans, I feel like the Pro Bowl is kind of like the Grammys, where if somebody has a legacy like Mike Evans does, being 10 straight years of having 1,000 yards, they'll give them a nomination, even if the album, or in this case, season, isn't quite to par with some of these other contemporaries around them. They'll give them a nod, like you saw with like Nas getting nominated for a couple times, and you'll see like Madonna there, or you'll see, like just different nominations that maybe don't deserve it as much.
Macklemore.
Well, yeah, Macklemore.
That may be the worst one ever when you have potentially two of the greatest rap albums of the 2010s that year up for it. And then you're like, no, let's give it to Macklemore for what was it? Flower Shop
It was
or
The Heist.
The Heist? Yeah.
Yeah, they had a song about fucking thrift shopping, and that beat over Good Kid, Mad City, Yeezus, Magna Carta, Take Care, and all these other albums that were much better.
Yeah, all those albums are much better. And then also the you can talk about Amon Ra getting snubbed, but every hierarchy I've seen for Coach of the Year doesn't have Dan Campbell in the top three. I was like, you want to talk about a legacy award for where they started as 13-1, then they go 7-9, just barely miss the playoffs, where they go 1-7 and then almost win out. They knock off the Packers, and then this is the most wins that they've had since 1993, I believe, or franchise
91.
in 91. And this is the most wins you had in over 3 decades. This is the first time you've won your division or played a home playoff game since 1993. This is the most cursed franchise. This is one of the most dysfunctional franchises. And Dan Campbell goes in there and turns it around. And then they're now the 3 seed, and they end up winning 13 games this year. And because they beat the Dallas Cowboys, and Roger Goodell should have overturned the results of that game because we have evidence that the Lions won that game. But like, Dan Campbell should be the odds-on favorite for Coach of the Year. If Brian Daboll can win it for the Giants, like, oh, what a great job Brian Daboll did, bringing Daniel Jones and winning one-possession games and being a wild card team. It's like, no, Dan Campbell deserves to be the Coach of the Year. You see him on the sideline. He's been the most aggressive coach here. He's going for fake punts. He's making crazy plays. And then Dak Prescott said that Dan Campbell, after the game, he's like, that guy is actually insane in the best way possible, just with how he goes for it, how he's able to motivate that team, just the pain he's gone through. He's had the best Hard Knocks in NFL history. Everyone overlooked the Lions this year. They're still picking the Packers. Some people were picking the Bears. Some people were picking the Vikings. And then the over-under for the wins for the Lions this year was 9.5 still. 9.5 for the Lions. And they won.
We cashed.
Which we cashed, and they won 13 games this year, if you include the game that Roger Goodell should have turned over. So if anyone should have been snubbed and should be on that list, it is Amon-Ra St. Brown for the Pro Bowl, but it's also Dan Campbell because he's the Coach of the Year this year.
Yeah, and they mentioned Kevin Stefanski, D'Amico Ryans, and Shane Steichen. Don't get me wrong, Shane Steichen had a great season, and he definitely deserves to be in the conversation. But I would take Dan Campbell over Shane Steichen in this situation.
Yeah.
Because the Colts, it's like, you look at the Colts team, and what they, I know they exceeded expectations. You had Gardner Minshew, all this storyline there, but everything you said there with Dan Campbell and what the Lions have been, and them being able to be as good as promised as all the expectations started to mount for them, like,
Better.
yeah, like they've been able to be arguably the best team. Had they have won that game, and obviously I think the 49ers would have played their starters had this happened, but had they won that Cowboys game, they would have been the 1 seed,
Yeah.
potentially, had the Rams beat the 49ers with all their starters. So, I mean, I don't know. I think that's definitely something to consider for a team that I don't think has ever been the number 1 seed, ever.
No.
So, this is a historic season, and for me, with all of their expectations, they were able to beat a team like the Chiefs. They're able to beat all of these winning teams, beating the
Yeah.
Cowboys. So,
And he had to follow up and fix the horror, the disturbance in the force, the unexpected tragedies, the tsunami of chaos that was Matt Patricia being the head coach, Coach Pencil, who should have been Coach Pencil, Matt Patricia, and Dan Campbell had to follow up that and and rebuild the morale of that team, rebuild that team. He took Jared Goff, rebuilt his confidence on that team. People forget how bad the Lions have been, and now that the Lions are dominant this season, they're not just good, but they are a dominant team that beat you in the trenches with the O-line and the front seven there. And then he took that team, rebuilt it, has Ben Johnson, has AG there with Aaron Glenn there, has been the grit guy, biting off kneecaps. People wrote him off there. It took him until last year and this year to warm up to him. And then he's not in the conversation for coach of the year. Like, give me a break.
Disrespectful.
Disrespectful.
But I think their vengeance will be met in super wild card weekend as we look forward to the preview of the playoffs. I can't believe we've made it this far.
We've made it this far. Super wild card weekend. Yeah, we covered and recapped every single game this week, recapped all of the storylines. So make sure follow us on all of our social medias at the Brickyard Podcast, at Brick Nation Media. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube, hit the like buttons, and most importantly, stay brick.